everybody. Welcome back to Crime Weekly. I'm Stephanie Harlow.
And I'm Derek Levasseur.
So today we're diving into part 2 of the Dee Dee Blanchard and Gypsy Rose Blanchard case. And today is going to be a little of a different episode because we have a guest who we're going to introduce momentarily. But we're also going to go through the timeline of Gypsy Rose's medical history in this episode. So all the doctors, nurses, medical people out there, I know that you're out there because I see you in the comments. It's great. And you are going to definitely have your fill of information in this episode. And then Derek and I are going to kind of, after we bring our guest on, who's very familiar with Gypsy Rose's medical records, we're going to sort of give our take as she goes through the timeline and kind of how we see it. And based on our very lengthy interview and the time we spent with her, what we kind of got from it. So are you ready, Derek?
I am ready. I want to preface it by saying, because we've already done the interview, we did it yesterday, actually. I think with this interview, some of you are going to agree with Fancy, some of you are not. And I think, like a lot of things in life, it's open to interpretation. It's the same information, but just like our political climate, you can take the same clip and interpret it two separate ways. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your feedback in the comments to let us know what you think about all of this and what you make of it and how it affects your opinion on this case in totality. So,
yeah, and basically what we want to say is we're trying to show both sides, and we're trying to show many different sides of the narrative, which is, obviously the mainstream, well-known narrative, that being that Gypsy Rose Blanchard was a victim of her mother who suffered from Munchhausen-by-proxy, even though Dee Dee Blanchard was never officially or formally diagnosed with Munchausen-by-proxy. And then this other emerging narrative is that essentially, which is kind of what our guest believes, is that Gypsy Rose and Dee Dee both came from a family of con artists, people who learned and had lived their lives trying to get as much as they could with as little actual input and effort as possible. So what our guest today thinks is that Dee Dee Blanchard was a con woman and Gypsy Rose was raised to also be a con artist, and they kind of came from a family of con artists. So this was just the typical environment that both Dee Dee and Gypsy were raised in. It was what they felt was normal, and it was the way that they knew how to function. And how our guest explains this is you can tell that Gypsy Rose suffered from actual medical issues, that the reasons she was going into the doctor were real, and the doctors were treating her for real illnesses, things like putting a feeding tube in. And many of you in the comments who have medical experience, like doctors, nurses aides, things like that, you were like, there's no way that doctors are going to perform a surgery to put a feeding tube into a child just based on the word of the mother. They're going to make sure there's a legitimate medical reason to do that. Gypsy Rose had her salivary glands removed. She and many other people have said that Dee Dee had this done without an actual reason, and that Dee Dee made these symptoms happen in Gypsy so that the doctors felt there was a legitimate reason to do that. But once again, doctors aren't going to go in and just operate and remove a child's salivary glands based on the word of the mother.
Yeah, because the parent asked you to.
Yeah. So what our guest today is saying is all of these things were legitimate medical reasons for Gypsy to be in, except for the cancer diagnosis, which obviously there was never a cancer diagnosis. But essentially the only reason that Dee Dee and then Gypsy, as she got older, kind of went along with this stuff was for the benefits that they were getting, the financial benefits and the trips and all of this stuff, because there was no medical fraud happening. Because if medical fraud was happening, Medicare, who had paid for most of these procedures, would have come after them at some point, and even would have come after Gypsy after the death of her mother, things like that. There would have been something going on. The doctors would have been sued for malpractice, things like that. And none of that stuff happened because the medical procedures were necessary and were done.
They were warranted, yeah.
They were warranted. And so basically, Gypsy and Dee Dee were kind of this partnership at some point, and they were kind of going along with it because of what they were receiving from not necessarily the doctors, but from the community that surrounded them, which is why they moved around so much.
Yeah, I think what you're going to hear a lot of today, and we were talking about it before we hit record, and it's going to come up later in the episode, is the difference between Munchhausen-by-proxy and malingering by proxy, and that they're not the same. And I will say in episode 1, a lot of you guys mentioned that in the comments. So we're going to dive more into that. I think you got to take out of it what you want. And I appreciate most people just listening as we go. As Stephanie said to me in episode 1, you just got to trust me on this. We're going to go over everything. We're not saying that any of this is fact. We're trying to present both sides. And then by the end, we'll give you our opinions. And hopefully you guys will hold off until then to come to your own conclusions as well.
I don't have a conclusion yet.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We don't.
Yeah.
We don't. I mean, and we did the interview yesterday. Stephanie had brought Fancy in, and I'm approaching this whole thing with a level of skepticism. And I said it to Fancy in the interview, like, don't take it personal. I got to push back on this because there are people who disagree with you. So I have to be that person. So I'm asking those questions not because I feel that way, but because they're going to be asked in the comments. And she was like, listen, totally get it. So there was some pushback. It wasn't us just sitting there listening to everything Fancy said and eating it all up with a silver spoon. There was some conversations about some of the things she said and some clarifications as well.
Yeah, and once again, as Derek said, these are medical records, and we've seen this happen a million times in trials where we'll have one expert witness for one side look at medical records or look at a psychiatric evaluation and get a certain analysis from that, and then another expert from the other side looks at the very same information and gets a completely different analysis. People are going to have different analysis or analyses based on the information that's in front of them. But what we are doing here is trying to hear every side out. And so nothing that we're putting on our podcast episode today is something that we wholeheartedly 100% stand behind, but we are exploring this as you are, and we're going through this as you are, and we're gathering the information as you are. So at the end of it all, when we have as much as possible, we can put that all together and see how we feel about it. But Fancy does have an extensive knowledge of this case, an extensive knowledge of the medical records, as you're going to see.
And Stephanie, why did you bring her on? I asked you this before we started recording.
So, yes, it was pretty much the comments when we did the Crime Weekly News.
Yeah.
And there was people saying, you don't know what you're talking about. Gypsy's not a victim. And then a lot of people said, check out Fancy Maselli.
Yeah.
So that is what I did. And then I reached out to her. I talked to her. She helped me out with medical timelines and things like that. And then I said, hey, why don't you come on and tell us what you know? Because I have these records now. Right? But you've been with them for so much longer, you're going to have a better grasp on them. And also it's going to help clarify things for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we can get into it. And as we said at the top of this, these are Fancy's opinions. They don't necessarily reflect the opinions of myself or Stephanie. We're giving her the platform to talk about it per a lot of your recommendations. So take out of it what you will.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we're going to get started where we left off. Gypsy and Dee Dee, they're kind of on the run, right? They're not really in touch with Gypsy's father, Rod, and his wife, Christy. They're definitely not super in touch with Dee Dee's family, the Blanchards. And they're all over the place, but they're going to end up in Slidell, Louisiana. So on the morning of August 29th, 2005, one of the deadliest and most destructive hurricanes in United States history made landfall. As Hurricane Katrina roared through the Gulf Coast, Slidell, a city 45 minutes northeast of New Orleans, experienced catastrophic flooding and destructive winds. The storm surge overwhelmed Slidell's levees, leading to the decimation of homes, businesses, and infrastructure. The twin span bridge, which connects Slidell to New Orleans, suffered extensive damage as the rising storm surge pulled or shifted bridge segments off their piers. A total of 64 spans, each weighing over 255 tons, had fallen into Lake Pontchartrain below, and another 473 spans were misaligned, which is crazy because each of those spans weighed 255 tons. And so it really gives you an indication of how strong the winds and the water was during Katrina, how devastating this storm was. And we know that it affected New Orleans very badly, but just 45 minutes away, Slidell also got hit. So in Slidell, New Orleans, and many other cities in Louisiana and Mississippi, countless lives were lost, and residents were forced to evacuate their homes, seeking refuge with family, friends, or in shelters. Dee Dee Blanchard and her then 14-year-old daughter, Gypsy Rose, were amongst the droves of people escaping the floodwaters. And Dee Dee and Gypsy, for a time, they stayed in a shelter for people with special needs in Covington throughout the worst of the storms. And when the winds and the rains had subsided, they returned to their apartment building only to find it devastated. Luckily, the two would once again benefit from the kindness of strangers.
It didn't take a lot to convince Dee Dee and her daughter Gypsy Rose to make a new home in Aurora. They already knew it was meant to be.
It is the perfect town, the perfect place.
I think it was a blessing in disguise. It took something like a hurricane to make us have a happy ending.
Dee Dee was happy enough just having medical care for Gypsy. She says she never expected this.
It's amazing. It's amazing, the outpouring of love and support.
Dr. Janet Jordan met Dee Dee and Gypsy while on a mission trip to the hurricane-ravaged areas. She says she knew right away she'd see them again.
They're like lost souls who were meant to have been born and raised in Aurora.
After arranging a helicopter ride from Louisiana to St. John's Hospital, the process began to find them a permanent home. It turns out St. John's already owned this house, and with the help of local donations, it was turned into a home.
I think that's just kind of what we're all about. You know, we're all about doing what we can to help people that are in a bad situation.
It's beautiful, and it's happy, and it's full of love.
Gypsy and Dee Dee say they're blessed. Dr. Jordan says they deserve to be.
It was pretty devastating down there, it really was. And they never ever lost hope. I think they brought hope to everybody else that was down there.
This is home to us. We have been wandering for so long, and this is finally our home. So it's so good to be here.
Yay.
This is Kara Rastelli reporting for KY3's Ozarks Today.
So Aurora is located in Lawrence County, Missouri, and for 2 years, Gypsy Rose and Dee Dee lived there in a house that St. John's Hospital provided to them rent-free. And when we talk to our guest, Fancy Maselli, in a little bit, she's going to explain that a specific doctor that Gypsy had been seeing for about a decade at that point in Louisiana, he sort of arranged this house for them, and he actually had relocated to Missouri at that point. So according to Dee Dee, she had not only lost Gypsy's birth certificate to Hurricane Katrina, but also all of her medical records. And both of these things being lost, quote unquote, would be convenient for Dee Dee in the future. In June of 2008, Habitat for Humanity built the Blanchards a cute little pink house in Springfield, Missouri, complete with a wheelchair ramp and a jacuzzi bathtub for Gypsy's physical therapy.
The two were interviewed after Habitat for Humanity built them a handicapped accessible home because of Gypsy's disabilities. They said she was confined to a wheelchair.
We have an awesome bathtub. It's a jacuzzi tub meant for my muscles. And we have a wonderful ramp. I remember my mom had gave me this little glass house, and she said, one day this will be real. And now it finally is.
That's Gypsy 7 years ago, clutching her mother Dee Dee's hand.
It's so easy to live here, and it's so peaceful.
Building the house has been incredible to see something that's just a hole in the ground, and for it to be done, it's an experience like no other. It's a happy ending.
Well, this is a good cause. This is my favorite cause, yeah.
Yeah, so up to this point, I see a couple things. I see a young girl who clearly has some medical condition, something going on, or at least the perception that she has something going on. And you can see how a community can come together to support people like this, people who are going through hard times. And it's one of the best things about our society is that we will
humanity, yeah.
We will come together to help those in need in some cases. So on one hand, I'm it makes me happy to see this young girl who's getting this happy ending as she described it. On the other hand, I can't help but look through a skewed lens of what's really going on here. Cause now this is, we're looking at in 2024.
And with hindsight,
A
yeah.
lot of things have transpired, including Dee Dee no longer being here and being murdered by Gypsy and her boyfriend. So it's a very different story these days as far as happy endings. So it's tough to watch that video and not think about that, but I'm trying to stay in the moment and take it step by step because that's where we were in 2008. So it's important to keep that in context.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that if you were with Gypsy Rose and Dee Dee at that time, especially in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, right? Because so many people were
That was
displaced.
terrible.
So many people were struggling. Everybody, the world knew
Can't
about
believe
it,
that was 2000 that long ago.
I know it feels like it was not
Yes.
that long
Think
ago,
about the
especially
Superdome
because
and-
Gypsy and Dee Dee spent some time in the Superdome. Apparently, according to Fancy Miss Sally, who we're gonna get to in a second, this is when Gypsy and Dee Dee shaved Gypsy's head, hoping that a cancer diagnosis would give them more of a chance of basically getting the hell out of Dodge, right? They had to get out of the New Orleans area. It's devastated. There's nothing there. They don't have money. They no longer have a place to live. Are they going to go back to Dee Dee's family, who, she's not on great terms with because allegedly they've been questioning what's going on with Gypsy? Are they going to call Rod and Christy? And is Dee Dee going to suck up her pride to admit that she needs help from Gypsy's father at this point? No, they're going to try to figure out a way, or at least Dee Dee and possibly Gypsy as well, are going to try to figure out a way to use the, I am a sick little girl in a wheelchair kind of mask in order to get the help and use the system. And apparently that is a little bit of what happened. And they did end up, while they were in that shelter after Katrina, it was a shelter for people with special needs. And it was apparently and reportedly Gypsy who had approached this doctor, Dr. Janet Jordan, the one you saw in that clip, and it was basically saying, I'm very sick. I have cancer. And I got to get out of here, right? And this is when they airlift them to St. John's. And from there, the rest is history. They get that St. John's house for a few years in Missouri, and then they get the house built for them in Springfield by Habitat for Humanity. So now they're pretty much set up absolutely fine. And we're going to go back into this timeline, into this time when we're talking about Gypsy's medical history. But before we do that, before we get on that journey, let's take a quick break. Cats are great companions. Anyone who has 1, 2, 3, or more understands that cats bring something really special to your life. They bring a lot of joy to your life. So the least you can do is feed them the best cat food that money can buy. And that's why this podcast is sponsored by Smalls. Smalls cat food is protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients that you would find in your fridge. And it's delivered right to your door. That's why veterinarians.org rates Smalls 10 out of 10 for ingredient quality. I don't have a cat, but my mom has my old cat, Rascal. She adopted Rascal. And I know that Rascal loves Smalls because when we first had Smalls as a sponsor, they sent us some and I brought it over and we kind of did a taste test with Rascal. We put her old food next to the Smalls food and visually you couldn't really tell the difference, especially if you're a cat, but she kind of nibbled at both of them and then she devoured the Smalls cat food. And since then, Rascal will only eat Smalls and I've noticed a huge difference in just how shiny her coat is, how soft she is, and she seems to have like a little bit more pep in her step, even though she is getting up there in age. And after making the switch to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements. That's a big deal. And if you have a particularly picky cat, aren't they all? Smalls has a sampler, so your cat can try everything Smalls has to offer, and you'll be able to quickly tell which one is their favorite. Plus, the team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product, you can try it risk-free. That means they will refund you if your cat won't eat their food. There's literally nothing to lose, and Derek's going to tell you how you can check Smalls out for yourself.
Now is the time to make the switch to Smalls. Head to smalls.com/crimeweekly and use promo code crimeweekly at checkout for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use our code Crime Weekly for 50% off your first order. One last time, that's promo code Crime Weekly. Crime Weekly is all one word, for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. All right, we're back from break. And before the break, we were talking about this fictitious cancer diagnosis that never happened. And this is the first instance where what I described to you at the top of the show comes into play. What do I mean by that? You have a situation here where clearly from that clip, which is why Stephanie included it, you can see that Gypsy's head is shaved. And I had asked Stephanie, or I had posed the question in episode 1, who was involved in this, right? Was Dee Dee holding Gypsy down and shaving her head, even though Gypsy didn't want to do it? Was Gypsy shaving her own head? Was it a collaborative effort? The fact of it is her head was shaven. The fact is that Gypsy and Dee Dee both knew Gypsy didn't have cancer. The question, and where your opinion and the opinions of others come into play, is who's responsible here? Who's at fault? I think you can make an argument it's entirely Dee Dee's fault because she's the adult. She's been programming and ingraining and grooming Gypsy from a very young age to believe this is the right way to do things to get what you want. I also think there's going to be people who could say, listen, at this point, Gypsy was 13, 14 years old, right? She knows right from wrong, but yet she's playing along with it now because she wants these things as well.
Yeah, she wants the Disney World trips. I mean, she got to meet Miranda Lambert and Blake Shelton, and they gave her money, and she got to meet Sean Astin from Lord of the Rings, like one of her favorite actors, and she was swimming with dolphins. And the way that Fancy Miss Sally poses it is Dee Dee pretty much sat her daughter down at some point and was like, hey, listen, we're going to keep getting all this good stuff, right? We're going to keep getting houses built for us and people giving us money and putting us up on stage and, all of these fairy tale things that you want. All you got to do is let me keep shaving your head and, sit in this wheelchair when people are around. And that's all. Just play the game. And Fancy likens Gypsy less to a victim and more to a child actor who knew the role that she was supposed to play and played it. Now, I might argue with that, and I might say, I think child actors are abused, technically.
Yeah.
I don't think, I always get uncomfortable when I see a child actor who's consistently in things, and I worry about these kids, right? Because it's like, are you old enough to actually consent to what you're doing, which is essentially signing away your entire childhood, right? You're not going to real school. You're getting, look at the kids on, I don't even know how old they were when they started on the Stranger Things show, like season 1, they were very young. You're probably getting homeschooled on set. You don't have a normal life. You're not coming home from school and playing with your friends, whether it's on video games or playing outside with them. You're not doing your homework at night and going to bed at a decent hour. Like you're on set 12, 16 hours a day. You're getting homeschooled, if that. You don't have the same amount of friends. Like your friends are other child actors. It's a completely different life. And are they old enough to consent to and really understand what that means, what they're giving away? Or are their parents like, hey, you're going to have money and you're going to get to do cool things and you're going to get to go to cool places. And the kid's like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Do they actually understand what they're giving up? I don't know. You might say that child actors are victims of their parents as well. But at what point does it become, okay, this is more about my free will now? I'm old enough to make my own decisions and not go along with this anymore. And if there does come a moment where that child says, I'm old enough to not go along with this anymore, does that mean that Gypsy wanted to go along with it?
And I think that's where those answers we'll never have because Dee Dee's no longer with us. And so you only have one side of the story. But from where I'm sitting, this is absolutely, just even watching this clip, it's a form of child abuse. I'm not saying what I feel about Gypsy as far as the murder, which we're going to talk about as the series progresses, but compartmentalizing these things individually is important here because two things can be true at once, right? And I don't necessarily think Gypsy was pushing back against Dee Dee at this point, saying like, I don't want to do this. Why are you making me do it? But the reality for me, at least, just my opinion, is that this was what was taught to Gypsy at a very young age. It's all she really knew. And I do think the way you describe those conversations going is what happened. And that to me is still a form of child abuse. And in that sense, Gypsy is a victim. because again, that's her mom's responsibility to teach her right from wrong, not to condone this type of behavior. And yet, when I say the word partners, I don't say it in the criminal sense. I say it more in the sense of that's how Dee Dee viewed their relationship. And I think maybe even Gypsy, as a younger person, wanting the love of her mom, saw it as a bonding experience to be working together collaboratively to do these types of things. So there's only one person in that story that should be at that point, even though Gypsy's 14, should be the one saying this isn't what we should be doing. And I also think that because Gypsy did have some things going on, you're taking advantage of a young person who's not completely in the position to make those decisions. So that's my problem.
Here's the huge distinction, though. And I kind of agree with this. Dee Dee was not making Gypsy sick. Gypsy did have health problems that were being capitalized on and used for financial and monetary gain. And Fancy gave an example of John Sheehan when we were talking in our interview. And John Sheehan, for anybody who doesn't know, that's Dirty John. Very, very well-known true crime story of this man who basically finds this woman, and she's got money, and he love bombs her, and he says he's rich and he's got a beach house, and he doesn't have any of that. He's a lifelong con artist, and he learned the game of the con from his father. Now, does that make him less culpable as an adult? No. And Derek and I were talking before we started recording. You can look at any of these serial killers, any of these prolific or non-well-known serial killers, and you can trace back into their childhood abuse, neglect,
some level of trauma along the way.
Of course. But that doesn't mean that as adults, we're holding them less culpable for their actions of murder or killing or whatever, based on the fact that in childhood they were treated poorly. So what you have to understand is when Gypsy killed her mother or took part in the plan to kill her mother, when she was arrested, she was 23 years old. She doesn't look 23. She tells the police in the interview that she's 19. She's 23. She is an adult, and she was well aware of that fact. But even after she killed her mother, and even after she orchestrated this plan to do so, and the police are sitting her down and asking her how old you are, she's saying, I'm 19. She's still lying, even though there is plenty of evidence that she knew exactly how old she was at the time she was arrested. So she continued lying even after her mother was gone. And some might say she was just doing what she had learned to do her whole life. And some might say she was keeping the con going.
Here we go. Here's the debate. This is a debate that's going on in the comments as well. And I think a lot of the reason the Gypsy Rose story is so polarizing, because you can find people that support all sides of this. So this is just one of it. And we're only 25 minutes into this episode. So imagine where it's going to go.
All right, so to go over Gypsy Rose Blanchard's medical history and records with us, we did bring in Fancy Maselli, and I'm going to have her introduce herself to you and tell you why she is somebody that she feels she's, able to talk at length about this stuff.
So I basically, got into this by just wanting to write a little show. I did not expect for it to be like something that became my whole life at all. If you had asked me 8 years ago when I started this, if this was where I was going to be sitting today, I would have laughed at you. I would have been like, oh, absolutely not. So I didn't start out to try to be like the expert on this case or anything. That happened along the way. So about 2 years into me being with the Blanchards, and I went down there, I met them in person, we signed a life rights agreement, all of those different things. I basically started questioning. I always expected Gypsy to lie because that's the nature of what she grew up as. She grew up being taught that it's okay to lie with no remorse. And she even says it in Mommy Dead and Dearest. She's never been honest, not even with her attorneys, right? So I expected that, but I did not know that the family would lie to me. Well, when I saw the show come out, I saw more of the interrogation video than I had seen in Mommy Dead and Dearest. And so I asked them about it, and she goes, oh, well, we got the interrogation video up in Waukesha, which is where they were arrested, Wisconsin. And I had never even thought of looking there. Like, oh my God. I was like, oh, wow. So we put in a FOIA, but then she just asked me, she goes, do you just want it? And I was like, oh, yeah, absolutely.
Now, who said this?
And this was an A&E producer. I got that interrogation video and it changed everything. Because I really feel like once you see that, you can't unsee it. And, you know, it really was a shocking moment for me because I kept waiting for Gypsy to finally tell the truth. I was abused. I was this, I was that. And it never came. And it was 4 hours of just lie after lie after lie after lie. And it was so well done. Like, she didn't miss a beat. And as soon as she knew that they weren't buying this one thing, you know, and they gave her Nick, Stan gave an opening to her, you know, and he said, was Nick the one who did this? And she just flipped on a dime and turned on him. And it was shocking to me. And I cried. And I realized that everything I had thought I knew at that point was false.
I'm going to pause really quickly here because Fancy mentioned something about the interrogation video. She's talking about the 4-hour interrogation video of when Gypsy Rose was arrested. Now, I know for a fact Derek has never seen this video, probably hasn't even seen clips of it. I have watched the entire thing, but I have put together a few early portions in the interview for us to listen to and react to, and that way Derek can get an idea of how Gypsy was behaving in her interrogation video. And for those of you who haven't heard or seen Gypsy in her police interrogation after the murder of her mother, you guys can also get an indication of how she was behaving.
And I want you to understand that you need to be honest with me, and if you're involved in anything that I'm about ready to tell you, then you need to tell me, okay? Your mom's dead, okay? Now, what I want to ask you is, your mom's passed away, okay, and she's deceased, all right? Now, what I want to ask you, did you have involvement in this? Okay. No. Hang on, listen to me for just a second, okay? I want you to understand something, okay? Remember the snowball that we talked about? You remember the pencil that we talked about? I'm going to demonstrate something with a pencil here, okay? Look at me. Look at me for just a second, okay? Sometimes people are going along, you know how you got a pencil? You got the lead here and you got the eraser right here, right? You know what I'm talking about? You've seen a pencil, right? You've used a pencil before, right? Okay? And when you write with a pencil, you write your own story, right? Okay? And you take that pencil and you're writing along with your story. Well, sometimes some people make mistakes when they write stuff down, don't they? We've all made mistakes. You've made mistakes. I've made mistakes, right? You ever made a mistake in your life? Yeah. And I've made mistakes in my life. And hang on just a second, okay? When you're writing this stuff down, all of a sudden you make a mistake. Well, what do you do with that mistake? You take that pencil and you flip it over and you start erasing stuff, okay? And you erase it and you recorrect it. And you take that pencil and then you rewrite your history, your story, okay? And I kind of think that's where you're at with this tonight, okay? That you have a chance to rewrite your story. And I think that's what you can do, is you can rewrite your story tonight, okay? Like I said earlier, I don't think you're a bad person. I really don't. You know, I don't think that's you at all. And you're not out here, you know, doing things that are so bad that nobody wants to talk to you, nobody wants to be around you. I don't think that's you, okay? But what I do think, okay, is there's some stuff going on that you and I need to talk about. And why these things happen, okay? And that's where we're at with this, okay? Now, I want you to understand something, that you need to be, look at me, okay? Look at me for just a second, okay? You're in a situation where you can help yourself right now, okay? And that's what you need to do, okay? You've got to help yourself, okay? Because the more and more you let that snowball roll down that hill and get bigger, what's going to happen is it's going to explode. And that's what's going to happen with you, you know. You don't want that, do you? I don't think you do. I wouldn't want that. So we've got to rewrite history. We've got to rewrite some things, don't we? Okay? And I think that's where we're at with all this, right? What happened with your mom that night?
I don't know what happened with my mom at all.
Okay, just listen to me, okay, sweetheart? You know what happened to your mom, okay? You know exactly. Sweetheart, listen to me. Let's not go down that road of taking your pencil and writing a bunch of mistakes down. And then when you get to a certain point, that paper's gone, and guess what? You can't erase it, can you?
No.
You can't erase it anymore. Do you want that?
Yes.
I don't think you do.
Yes.
I think you're smart enough to understand where we're at with this, okay? I think you know Okay? And I know that you know. All right? I wouldn't be here if I didn't know. And I know the answer to a lot of these questions. Okay? I already know them. Okay? I know them, and I'm giving you a chance to be honest with me, okay? Because you don't want this thing to spiral out of control. Okay?
No.
Your boyfriend's in here. Okay?
Oh, he's here.
He's in here. Okay? All right? And do you think that we've not talked to people?
No, I know.
Listen to me before you say a whole lot. Do not dig yourself in a bunch of lies, because what's going to happen? That snowball's going to get so huge, sweetheart, that it's going to explode on you, and you're never, ever going to dig yourself out of it. Do you understand me?
I understand.
So I want to know, okay, why?
Why?
Why did you guys hurt your mom? Okay.
We would never.
Sweetheart,
hurt
look at me. Look at me. Look at me. I've got kids. I've been doing this for a long time.
I know, sir.
And I want you to understand something. Don't dig yourself that hole. Don't go down that path, okay? Because listen to me for a second. You go down that path, and what's going to happen? What do you think is going to happen to you if you go down that path? It's not a path to go down.
If anything, I don't tell lies.
Okay, then don't sit here and lie to me, because if you do, what's going to happen is it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. You're not going to remember the ones that you've told other people, okay? Other people that I've probably already talked to. You understand that?
I understand.
Okay. Why?
Would you like me to start from the beginning?
I only want you to start from the beginning, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. And I'm glad you're making that progress, okay? I'm proud of you for that. But the first thing that we need to get out of the way right now is why. That's the biggest thing. You've got friends that love you.
Of course
and care
I know.
for you.
You
and your mom
yes,
have friends that care for you.
I know.
You know what? They're down the bottom of this hill with that snowball, and they're asking all these questions. They're asking why.
I know.
Now, help me give them an answer as to why. Okay? You have to give me an answer as to why, because they are so concerned about you.
I know. I have a lot of friends in Missouri. I know that.
Okay.
And I would never hurt my mom.
Okay, sweetheart. Do you really want to dig yourself? You're digging yourself deeper. Okay?
No, seriously, I would never hurt her.
Listen to me. Okay. I don't play around with that. Okay. I'm not going to play around with this. Okay.
Sir, I didn't do anything.
Listen to me. Don't let that snowball get bigger, because that's what you're doing right now. Okay? You have a chance. You have the opportunity right here and right now. Because once I walk out that door and that opportunity's gone, guess what? It's gone. It's just like when that paper's taken away, when you're writing that pencil, you don't have a chance to erase that mistake. Okay?
Sir, I have a million questions right now.
Okay. You know what? And I'm proud of you for wanting to ask those million questions. And you know what? We can answer those, okay?
Okay.
But we got to get down to the bottom of why.
Okay.
The why. And your friends are very, very concerned about you. They all love you. But guess what?
Sure.
Those friends are standing at the bottom of that hill.
I understand.
And that snowball
I understand.
is getting ready to crush them, because they want to know why.
Things very, very clearly. You think that it's me? Why would you think that it's me? I have always loved my mom. My mom and I are best friends.
Listen to me. Please don't dig yourself in this hole. And that's what you're doing. You're still doing it. Okay? But do you not think that we've already talked to some people? Okay? Do you not think that we've talked to everybody? I mean, I'm not going to come in here without having all my things in line. Okay? I want you to understand that.
Of course I understand that. And
we need to get to the why. When we get to the why, then all these other questions I can answer for you, and we can move on with this. Okay? Do you really want to disappoint your friends?
no, of course not.
Okay. Then why?
May I please speak?
Well, when we get to the why this happened,
I don't even really know what happened.
That's obviously just a very small portion of the interview, but what I want to bring up a few things that I didn't get to put in. First of all, at the beginning, he asks her, "Hey, do you have access to a cell phone, a computer?" And she says, no, I don't use a cell phone or a computer. And he's like, why not? And she goes, well, my mother was overprotective. She thought it wasn't safe. Now, in that interview, immediately within a few minutes, Gypsy's referring to her mother, Dee Dee, in the past tense. My mother was very protective. And now when he tells her, your mother's dead, she's like, oh, what? What? As if she doesn't know, as if she had no idea that her mother's dead. She's lying about not knowing her mother's dead. She refers to her mother in the past tense 4 minutes into the interview. And then when the cop's like, listen, we know you had something to do with this, she's like, how could you think that? How could you think that? I would never hurt my mother. She's lying, lying, lying. And she even specifically says, I don't tell lies. But then later on, we hear her in many documentaries and in many interviews say, all I do is lie. It's impossible for me to not lie. I'm going in front of the parole board tomorrow, and I'm so used to just telling people what they want to hear and lying to get my way. I really hope that I can manage to not do that with the parole board, right? So it's not a great look. If she had been this horrible victim, if she was trying to get away, if this was just a relief to her that finally her attacker, this person who had tortured her for so many years, was gone, you'd think she'd be running into the police's arms saying, yes, I had her killed, but it was my only option. I had nothing else to do. Like, I had to get out of there. I'm sorry. I feel terrible. I wish that I hadn't, but I came to a place where I felt there was no other choice, that it was her or me, which she has said that multiple times since. But there's none of that in this interview. No Gypsy talking about the horrible treatment she received at her mother's hands. It's just basically her denying that she had anything to do with it.
Yeah, and I could see the interrogation tactic that's being used in this interview. Very straightforward. You don't want to give them an opportunity to say, I did it or I didn't do it. You skip right over that. First off, he tries to soften it by saying, I think you're a good person. I don't think you're a bad person. I think that, you know, I have children. He's trying to get her to open up to him. And when she tries to go off track is when he puts the bumpers up and says, no, we're not going there. And he poses the question, why? So he's skipping over the, you did it, your boyfriend did it. Did you do it? Was he involved? Were you involved? He's skipping right over that and getting to the why. Because if you can get her to answer that question, if you can get her to say, well, you know, my mom wasn't nice to me, that in and of itself is a mission of involvement. So he's trying to go with that tactic, and she's doing different things to kind of divert the conversation and still play up the idea that this is a complete shock to her. And he's a little bit more aggressive at that point to say, I'll let you speak. You have no problem talking whenever you like, as long as you're answering my question. I don't want to go off on these side quests. I want to hear the why. And unless you're going to talk about that, I'm not interested in hearing you speak. And he's really drilling her down and holding her accountable. And it's a effective tactic. It can work. It might seem like at first, oh, he's not letting her speak. You don't want to do that, because if you allow them to speak, they will go on for 30, 40 minutes in an attempt to divert the conversation. So it may look almost like he's being, some of you may say as you're watching this, wow, he's being awful mean to her. This is this young girl.
I don't think so. I think he's being very sweet.
I'm not saying you, but there will be people who look at this and go, wow, he's being so aggressive. Why is he approaching her like that? It is a strategy that has been proven time and time again to work as far as keeping someone on task and holding them accountable by saying, hey, I don't think you're a bad person. Just tell me why. That's all I want to know at this point. And then you can reverse engineer it and work backwards. Once they say the reason why, or at least give a start as to why, you can say, okay, well then what happened? How did we get here to this why? And that's when you start to get some of the specifics where you may uncover some guilt knowledge.
I think he's being very balanced and measured with her. You know, he's walking the line of calling her sweetheart, telling her, oh, I'm proud of you. I'm proud that you're ready to talk. But also he's being firm, where he's like, okay, yeah, but I need to get you on track, and I need to keep you on track. And I need you to understand, for your own good, we already know so much. Lying to me gets you nowhere. Let's just figure this out together, kind of thing. But she's not, and I always, every time he's like, your mother's dead, and she's like, oh, what? It always gets me, because it's like, even if you can't say like, oh, she was Dee Dee's partner in crime, or even if you don't say, you know that she knows her mother's dead. And so you can see illustrated here what an amazing little actress she is.
So, all right, I'll push back on it without knowing as much as you know about the case. You've researched it, you know this whole script, and there's a lot of people out there who know more than me. Let me just push back on it for a second, okay? Is there a world, I always say that, you guys come at me for it. Take a drink every time I say, I see a situation or a world where this could happen, all right? Let's play this out quickly because we got a lot to cover. Gypsy's incentivizing or enticing Nicholas Godejohn to commit this crime. She's manipulating him. She's not necessarily saying, this is what I need you to do, but she's setting up the foundation to basically create an environment where he wants to do it, right? She's trying to manipulate him like she has manipulated others with her mother in years past. So she keeps pushing him. She keeps pushing him. She keeps stoking the fire. She knows it's getting to that point. We could be looking at a situation where she felt like this was going to happen, and this might be affirmation. Your mom is dead. Those words, your mom is dead. That reaction, there might be it might be genuine to a certain degree as far as not necessarily being surprised that she's dead, but the finality of it. Your mother, and she referred to her in this interrogation, this little clip we had, as, we're best friends. There might have been something in there where she finally gets that confirmation. There's no going back from this. Your mother, she's gone. So could it be just tears? Could it be acting? For sure.
She knew her mother was dead. She let him in. She planned the murder with him.
I'm not coming from the perspective of what you know. I don't know any of that. What I'm coming from is the perspective of the people watching this, the people like me, the novice viewers and listeners who are coming along for this ride with us, who do not know any of that context at this point. They could be watching that video like I am and saying, wow, without knowing the specifics of the murder itself, I could see a situation here where this is the first time she's hearing that the person who raised her, the person who's done everything with her up to this point, is dead, and you are responsible for it. You contributed to this. She's not going to say that part, but my point being, it could be a combination of acting and genuine feelings of, oh my God, I actually did this. This actually happened.
But it's not, because now you have that context and you know that she knows very well her mother's dead. And the fact that as a novice listener, without knowing the context, that she let him in, that she planned it, that she was well aware, that she went on the run with him. That's what I'm saying. But now knowing that context, isn't it crazy? Because she is such a good actress that if you didn't know that, you would absolutely think this girl's genuinely like shocked and upset. And I think that's kind of the point.
We're getting ahead, but did she admit to letting him in?
Yeah, of course. Like eventually, yes.
Okay.
We know that's what happened.
Because is that a version of it, or is she admitted that, yeah, I let him in to go kill my mom?
Are you asking me, like, factually in this case, has it been proven that Gypsy Rose at the time of this police interview knew very well that her mother was dead?
I'm asking you, is it possible that at this point, even though she contributed to let's say everything you just said is true, did she know that her mother was dead, or that she basically opened the door to let the wolf in?
She knew that her mother was dead.
How long had her mom been dead at this point?
Not long. It was maybe a couple of days.
So days, not just hours. We're talking days.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at this point, when Gypsy's at the police station, they're in the police station in Kenosha, Wisconsin. They're not in Missouri. They're not in Louisiana. This is where Nicholas Godejohn lived. So he traveled to her house in Missouri. She let him in. The whole murder happened. And let me just say, Gypsy claims she was not present for the actual stabbing of her mother, but there are some people who believe she
there
was.
You go. Well, there you
go. There's some possible or potential evidence that shows she may have been more involved than she claims. And that's the problem with Gypsy, is she lies so much.
You don't know what's the truth.
So easily and so well.
Yeah.
You can't tell the difference between the truth and fiction.
And by the way, I'm not a Gypsy Rose defender. I'm just trying to be the other side of the aisle, because I know that just from reading the comments from you guys, I'm not going to be the only person that thinks this. You just said it. Gypsy's said she was never in the room when it happened. So if we're to believe Gypsy Rose, we could be looking at a world where she let him in. Whatever happened in that room, she refused to be a part of it. And so she's assuming her mother's dead based on the fact that she knows she was stabbed, but having this detective bluntly say to her, your mother is dead. That reaction in that moment, was it real? Was it not? You clearly don't think so. And I think a lot of people will agree with you.
Remember that Facebook post, that bitch is dead? The one that actually brought law enforcement to the plant. Gypsy wrote that.
That was before.
That was before. So June 14th is when that Facebook post goes out. June 15th is when Gypsy and Nicholas go to jail and are arrested.
Yeah.
And Gypsy said, I wrote that on Facebook so that my mother's body would be discovered and she could have a proper burial.
Okay. All right. Well, let's keep going with it. I'm going to keep approaching this from the there's things that I've heard. Gypsy Rose was everywhere. I obviously know the big bullet points, but I'm trying to stay objective and go along from the beginning. We had the initial episode about Dee Dee. Now we have this situation where there's an interrogation. We're very early on in this, and all these other things are yet to be discovered. So my opinion will change throughout the series, but this is where I'm at right now, where could she be telling the truth? Maybe. Could she be lying based on history, based on the whole episode number 1? Absolutely, she could be lying. So that's where I'm at. But the detective clearly has information. He believes she's lying, which is why he's pushing her so hard.
Yeah, there's not a world that exists where I could have anybody play devil's advocate enough to convince me that in that moment when Gypsy Rose was informed by the police officer her mother was dead, that she did not know, and yet her reaction would let you know or make you feel that she didn't know she was hearing it for the first time.
That's you knowing everything you know now, though.
This is like award-winning, performance worthy is what I'm saying.
And I think people who are informed and educated on the facts, most of them will agree with you. But for people who may be hearing about this case for the first time at this depth, they'll probably disagree with you at this point, or maybe come to a different opinion because they don't know everything after that.
Yeah, absolutely. What we're going to focus on this episode, because I want to get into this conversation with you. And next episode, when we actually talk about the murder and talk about how it was planned, it's going to be a good one.
That's a different story. That's a
you are
completely
gonna
different
be
story.
Like, wow.
Yeah, that's a complete. And
right?
then we can revisit this conversation.
Revisit this. Yeah.
And it's not going to be an I told you so. It's okay.
No.
Now you have the facts.
Now you have all the same facts that I do.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, but this episode, we're focusing on the medical part. And some people may be like, why are we focusing on this so hard? Well, it's very important, right? Because the narrative out there very much still is Dee Dee Blanchard made Gypsy sick, which is common in Munchhausen-by-proxy. That happens. And Fancy was talking to us about another case of a mother that was basically poisoning her son just a little to keep him sick so that he would never leave her, so that he would always be with her. To our knowledge, and from what we can tell, this did not happen with Dee Dee Blanchard, which is why Fancy believes this is more malingering by proxy, as in I'm using the illness of my child to get something, as opposed to Munchausen, whereas I'm making my kid sick to get attention or to benefit somehow from my child being sick. So that's kind of where it leads from. There's still a lot of people that don't believe Gypsy Rose Blanchard had any medical issues at all, and that all of them were fabricated by Dee Dee. So based on the medical records, Fancy Maselli believes that Gypsy was actually sick and that from birth, she had a chromosome disorder that was not identified until many, many years later, but this disorder explains a lot of the health issues that Dee Dee claimed Gypsy had, and once again, this is all supported in the medical records. So Fancy, you said that early on in Gypsy's life, the doctors were aware that she had a chromosome disorder. They just didn't have the medical technology or the know-how at that point to identify which one. That did not happen until 2011. But now we do know which chromosome disorder Gypsy had. And according to you, this was genetic from her father's side. Can you explain a little bit about this disorder and how you know about it and how you know it came from Rod Blanchard?
So it's the microdeletion of the 1q to 1.1 chromosome. And it is a genetic disorder. There are a couple breakouts where it doesn't have any reasoning for it, but it is mostly genetic in nature. So in 2011, when they finally identify this deletion, it clears up a lot, because this deletion can have failure to thrive. You have muscle weakness, you have eye problems, you have feeding problems, you have all the different things that she had along the way. Every single one of those she was predisposed to have based on this microdeletion of the 1q21q. The reason that we know it's not from Dee Dee is because when they do this test, now the first test we had, it came back, it was the karyotype, and it came back as saying, oh, we don't know, we don't think this is a chromosome disorder, we don't have anything. And for years, that was the only piece of paper that Colleen had. Well, this year when we went to look at it, I talked with an investigator out of Tarrant County, Texas, who specializes in Munchhausen-by-proxy, works with Dr. Feldman, Dr. Yorker, all of them. And I asked him very specifically, what is the difference between a mom who isn't a con artist family that just chose this as her con and a actual mother with Munchausen? And he broke it down for me, and it was the first time I understood it. He goes, you have to stop calling it Munchausen-by-proxy or a factitious disorder imposed upon another, or any of the other weird things that people want to call it, because no one understands what any of that is. And there's a very specific reason why we get convictions here in Texas that other states and other counties don't get. And that's because we put it into terms that's very simple for a jury to understand. And it comes down to, is it or is it not medical child abuse? And if you only use those words, medical child abuse, it becomes very clear. Was it necessary or was it not necessary? So then I had Colleen go back in. I said, will you look at that chromosome disorder one more time? Because I always said it was something that was going to smack us in the face, that we had been looking at the whole time and just missed. And she's like, but I thought the test came back inconclusive. And I said, I know, but I swear to you, Titania told me that she had a test that absolutely 100% proved that she had this chromosome disorder. Will you please go look for it? And she goes, okay. And so she did. And she came back 10 minutes later and she's like, oh my God, Fancy, you're right. It is this. And that was because we had 30 pages of a 32-page document originally. She found the last 2 pages in another file tucked away. And this was the microarray that is a very specialized genetic testing that identified this specifically. And then they actually tested Dee Dee as well. And it came back as not being from Dee Dee's side. And they said, oh, well, Rod is not available for testing.
So we're going to start discussing Gypsy's medical records from the year 2000. And I know we already went to Missouri, but we're going to go back in time a little bit because this is when the medical records really start picking up. And this is when she still would have been in Louisiana. So it starts on October 31st, 2000. Now, this is when Gypsy's going into the doctor and she has... she's about 9 years old at this point. You're going to hear Fancy explain this. And she's got complaints of muscle weakness in both legs. Now, remember, we talked in episode 1 about how Gypsy was in a wheelchair, not solidly, but on and off from about the age of 5. She's 9 years old now, and she's complaining of muscle weakness in her legs.
If you look at that document, that's where they do it's 10/31 of 2000. Dr. Garcia and Dr. Morteza do an EMG. And the complaint is that she has muscle weakness in both legs. They do a nerve conduction for both legs. They say that there's no electrophysiological evidence, neuropathy, all different things, or myopathy causing this. They don't know. They do an entire scan of her spine, her neck, her brain, the whole thing, the MRI of all of it, lumbar to top, all the way. And so they come back with not muscular dystrophy based on this, but they want to go ahead and still do the biopsy. And this is the reason why the chromosome disorder is important here. Because, like I said, she'd always told everybody it was chromosome disorder. It was a chromosome disorder. And muscular dystrophy is a chromosome disorder. It's a genetic chromosome disorder. And so this was one of the first things they went to rule out.
Okay, so as you heard, she gets tested, Gypsy gets tested for muscular dystrophy in 2000 when she's 9, and that test comes back negative. This is important to remember that when she's in Louisiana in 2000, the muscular dystrophy test comes back negative. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Have you heard that the flavored air category is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking? It is a whole new movement towards better habits led by the sponsor of today's video, Fume. We all have bad habits, and I know that often, even if you're trying to quit or you think you can get away from it, there's certain times, usually when you're out with friends and they're engaging in their own bad habits, that you feel like picking yours back up. But what if I was to tell you there's a better alternative that helps you kick your bad habit in an enjoyable way, and it's something you can take out with you? Fume is an award-winning flavored air device, and flavored air isn't like vaping. If vapor is compared to sticky soda, Fume cores are closer to herbal teas. Fume isn't a vape. There's no vapor. That means you can use it anywhere, anytime. There's no nicotine, so it's not addictive. And they use non-toxic flavors. They also don't use batteries, so you're never going to need to charge it. And it just looks and feels awesome. It's got a really high-quality wood grain design. It looks high-end, and it's got this weighted, really great weighted feel to it. It just feels good in your hand. And Fume's made to fidget with. It calms anxiety with magnets, snaps, and clicks. I think Derek has his right now, and he can kind of show you if you're watching on video, and if you're listening on audio, you can hear how satisfying this Fume is to play with.
Yeah, I got mine right here. It's got the wood, it's got the metal, really nice aesthetic. I like the magnets. You got to pull it apart, and then you also have the clicking there. Yeah, a little ASMR for you guys right here on Crime Weekly.
It really makes ditching your really bad habits very, very easy. So Derek's going to tell you how you can check Fume out for yourself right now.
That's right. Fume has served over 300,000 customers, and you can be their next success story. For a limited time, use our code CRIMEWEEKLY to get a free gift with your journey pack. All you have to do is head to tryfume.com. That's tryfum.com, and use our code CRIMEWEEKLY to get your free gift with your order today. Once again, that's tryfume.com.
Okay, that brings us to January 31st of 2001, so just a few months after she had the muscular dystrophy test.
In January of 2001, they do a muscle biopsy. Also, Dr. Garcia again. And they come back with it's not muscular dystrophy, but it is type 2 fiber atrophy. And she also has central nervous system lesions on her spine. But they rule out muscular dystrophy in that instant. And that muscle biopsy is the very first time we see the actual age change. Now, the date of birth is still correct of 7/27/91, but instead of being listed as 10 years old, in that one, she's listed as 12 years old.
Wait, they made her older?
They made her older in that one for some reason, and I don't know what that would have done. We can't figure out why. Maybe that one was just a typo, but it's where it starts. It starts from this typo or this making her older for some unknown reason. We don't know why. So at that same time, she has the eye surgery for her astropia that she was born with. And you can see that that's not just a lazy eye.
Can I ask you one thing before we move on to the dystropia?
Yes.
In your notes here, it says, suggest disuse of legs. Who suggested disuse of legs?
It didn't say. It does not say. So it's maybe they're saying maybe that's the reasoning. But as we find out, it's not the reasoning. They're just basically going, okay, so it's not what we thought it might be, but we still don't know what's causing it. So it could be this disuse of legs, or it could also be the CNS, the CNS lesions. So we're going to continue to keep looking into this. That's their whole thing.
So they weren't suggesting that she not use her legs, as in you should be in a wheelchair.
No. They were saying that maybe that was what was causing it. Maybe she wasn't doing, walking around very much or whatever. But this is pre her getting the wheelchair fully, because at this time she's still she was using a walker kind of thingy to help her walk. And then she had the wheelchair if she got tired.
Okay, so you heard Fancy describe this muscle biopsy that they did in January of 2001, and it came back with this type 2 fiber atrophy plus a central nervous system lesions on spine, so CNS lesions on the spine. When you look at what spinal lesions are and what causes them, well, it's very hard to sort of pin down anything, right? It could be an accident, it could be trauma to the spine, things like that, or it can be genetic, right? So it's just an abnormal growth of tissue. And like I said, can occur from some form of trauma, but it can also be genetic. Now, they couldn't figure out why she had these lesions on her spine, but she did. And you also heard me ask Fancy, well, it says the disuse of legs. And I thought that maybe that was suggesting that Gypsy not use her legs because of the muscle weakness and this and that. But they were saying that maybe her muscle weakness in her legs had been caused by her not using her legs enough because she's in the wheelchair. And I suppose in that situation, if there was no need for Gypsy to actually be in a wheelchair, you could say at that point that her mother was making her sick. Although, according to Fancy, and there are many other eyewitnesses who do say this, even though Gypsy was technically in a wheelchair from the time she was 5, she wasn't always in that wheelchair, right? And we heard this story from family members of Dee Dee's. Dee Dee goes to the store, Gypsy's jumping on the trampoline with the other kids. And Gypsy would sort of be in the wheelchair when everyone was around or when they were on public, but when she's home and things like that, she's not really in the wheelchair. So that likely wasn't the cause of her muscle weakness and these spinal lesions. Okay, so now we move on to April 2nd, 2001, and Gypsy's getting an MRI of her spine.
In 2001, they do another thoracic spine, lumbar, cervical spine, and brain MRI again, because now they're trying to figure out if the lesions are causing this. They don't know what's going on. And that all comes back negative again. So Garcia puts in there, it's not muscular dystrophy. We don't know what this is, but we still have type 2 atrophy, fiber atrophy. There's something causing this girl's legs to be weakened. There's something causing her feeding problems and all these other things. We just don't know what it is yet.
Between 2001 and 2004, there's not really anything happening in the medical records. And, some people might point to that and say, is this really a Munchhausen-by-proxy case when you've got years at a time where Gypsy's not going to the doctor, where she's not being dragged into the doctor by her mother. Now, before we continue on in the timeline, the medical timeline into 2004, I want to talk about 2 of the doctors involved in Gypsy's life and medical care. And we're going to focus specifically on these 2, Dr. Robert Steele, who became Gypsy's pediatrician in 2005, as well as Dr. Robert Beckerman, who worked at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City. And Beckerman worked out of the hospital's Comprehensive Sleep Disorder Center. But before he'd moved from New Orleans to Missouri in 2007, he had treated Gypsy Rose for 10 years. And this is according to a 2009 article in Treasures, which was a Children's Mercy publication, a hospital publication. Now, the article states that when Dee Dee and Gypsy relocated from the New Orleans area after Katrina, Dee Dee knew they were going to have to find new doctors in Missouri, and it was going to be hard to explain the last 14 years of Gypsy's medical history since all of the records had been, quote unquote, lost. We're going to find out that's not necessarily true, that there was a doctor involved in this, allegedly, who had the medical records. And in this publication, Dee Dee said, quote, "I was asked where I wanted to move. I said wherever Gypsy Rose would get the best care. So we moved to Missouri, and that's when I discovered Children's Mercy," end quote. The article goes on to explain that in the weeks after settling in Springfield, Gypsy had several appointments with different specialists at the hospital, but they were so happy to see that their old friend Dr. Beckerman was one of them, and Beckerman was happy to see the Blanchards as well. He said, quote, "I hadn't seen her for 2 years, and when I did, it was really special. I was really homesick at that time, and at that moment, it was what I needed. Dee Dee is such a wonderful person. She never complains, and I think that is why Gypsy Rose is so positive. Dee Dee is such a great advocate for her child. Having a child with special needs is not easy, especially going through what they went through. After Katrina, the medical care regressed dramatically in New Orleans. Gypsy Rose is right where she needs to be, getting state-of-the-art care," end quote. Now, Gypsy added to this happy reunion by saying, quote, "I was so happy to see him, not only because he was my doctor in New Orleans, but because he already knew all about me," end quote. And Dee Dee Blanchard said, quote, "We have built great life. We have new friends, a new home, and Gypsy Rose is being taken care of by great doctors. Yes, we miss New Orleans, but we've brought our traditions and culture with us. I feel like we got our happily ever after," end quote. We also have Dr. Steele, who becomes Gypsy's pediatrician. And he said, quote, "Dee Dee was pretty clear that Gypsy had a history of cancer and asthma, some sort of muscular disorder. Dee Dee didn't have the medical records. She said they're gone because it was chaos down in New Orleans after Katrina. So Dee Dee became the sole place for information. Probably the biggest concern I had was the history of cancer. Dee Dee could not give either the diagnosis nor really the length of treatment that she had been on. That was unusual, and to me, that was a red flag. The question is, at what point do you trust the parent to be accurate with the information?" End quote, which is a good question from Dr. Robert Steele. But as we're going to come to find out, and, according to Fancy, who has the medical records and can see these things, Dr. Steele had requested Gypsy Rose's medical history from Louisiana, and he had received it. So he would have known that there was no cancer diagnosis as he was treating Gypsy. And so there's going to be a lot of questions here. But let's start back at January 14th, 2004, when Gypsy Rose goes in for a sleep clinic visit.
Now, in 2004, she's at a sleep clinic visit. Now, this is with Dr. Beckerman. And I truly believe, I don't think that Dee Dee did this alone. I do think that there was medical fraud perpetuated, but I don't think it was Dee Dee who perpetuated the medical fraud. I think that was a couple of doctors that helped her out along the way. Beckerman being, in my opinion, allegedly for entertainment and educational purposes only, that being Beckerman, because she started seeing Beckerman when she was 4 years old. And Beckerman is the one who goes from, he sees her in Louisiana. He moves 2 years before Katrina to Missouri, and they follow to Missouri. And then he leaves right in 2014, 2015. He leaves and goes to Florida. And we start hearing a story about Dee Dee wanting to move to Florida. And so I think that her and Beckerman had some sort of agreement going on, because Beckerman's notes are always completely contradictory of each other. He never freaking follows up on anything. Dee Dee doesn't bring in her machine for the CPAP ever, and he makes excuses for her. He calls them his favorite mother-daughter, and he gives really weird details that a doctor normally would not put in the file.
They spent time with him, they went to dinner at his house.
Yes, all kinds of weird things, yes. And he is who helps them get the house that they're first in when they go to Missouri. So the first house they had was in Aurora, and that was provided by the hospital. The hospital actually paid for that, and then she gets the Habitat house, and they, move out. And during that period of time, she's barely seeing doctors at all. From 2005 to 2007, there's not a whole lot.
So let me ask one question, because I found an article from 2009 from the hospital. It's Dee Dee talking and Dr. Beckerman, and he says, "I've been Gypsy's doctor for the last 10 years. And they kind of made it seem like Dee Dee and Gypsy are going to the hospital now that they live in Missouri. And they just walked into the sleep clinic and they were like, "Oh, Dr. Beckerman's here. We had no idea." And then he was like, "Oh my God, I was so happy to see them. I felt so homesick and they made me feel better because I hadn't seen them in 2 years." But what you're saying is kind of no, he orchestrated their arrival in Missouri. He was able to help get them the house, which, like you said, was the hospital house. And so there wouldn't be a surprise if they strolled into his office and like, oh, fancy seeing you here kind of thing.
Well, little known thing that you don't know is he never stopped seeing her. That's the whole thing. Okay, so when he moved to Missouri, he did not give up his license in Louisiana. And there's still records of him seeing her. And in 2004, he's on a leave of absence. This is where I was going with the sleep clinic visit in 2004. Beckerman's on a leave of absence. That's when he's in Missouri at this point in time. And he's not there every time she goes. So sometimes he's there, but he's not there this time. And she sees a different doctor in the side of this sleep clinic. And this is where Dee Dee first says, oh, my memory's not good due to this accident I had 2 years prior. And that becomes something that she does use many times. If she's questioned or she sees someone new, she's always telling them she's just been in an accident of some sort. This accident did happen.
The car accident in New Orleans?
Yes, the car accident happened, but it was much earlier.
Yeah.
So she uses that over and over again as a way when she's seeing a new doctor to maybe, in case she tells something and it's wrong, then she can be, oh, well, yeah, it's the accident, my memory, it's bad, oh, it's bad. Okay, so it comes back. He talks about that she's only got mild asthma. She's got controlled rhinitis. She's got an unclassified congenital neuromuscular disease. He puts it in there that he notes this. And he states that Beckerman had suggested she go to this other specialist. And he doesn't really think that the specialist is needed, but he goes ahead and sends her because he said, well, the specialist will then decide if they feel like they need to see her or not. That specialist can do this. And since Beckerman already ordered it, I'm going to go ahead and send you to them anyway. But I personally don't think this is going to help. So this is the first time somebody's telling them, hey, maybe this isn't the right course of action. And it's only because Beckerman isn't there that day. Otherwise, Beckerman's files, like I said, very confusing. So that's why that one in 2004 was one that I noted because, the doctor's saying, I don't think it's this, but we'll try it,
So this is interesting to me because, and I said it, a lot of it got cut out in these clips because the interview with Fancy was over 2 hours, but there was a lot of conversations in between. And I was a skeptic on a lot of this, not necessarily because I truly believe what I'm saying, but I want to push Fancy on these because I don't know what her motive is for coming out with this. I don't know Fancy. I've never met her before. So I'm not going to just take everything she says at face value. I'm going to question it and be inquisitive. So with this, when she started talking about this whole, I guess I'll call it conspiracy for a lesser way of describing it. But you have Dee Dee, who clearly is doing something at minimum, malingering at minimum, right? She's got something going on here. There's clearly a motive there for doing it financially. They're getting all these other benefits as well. You can see very easily why they would keep up this facade. But then she started talking about physicians, doctors being involved with it as well. And you have to understand, you look at that and you go, okay, where are we going with this? Okay. Like who else is involved here, right? Like what would be the incentive for these doctors? But there was something, and I don't know if you were going to see my reaction. It might be a single shot on Fancy when she's talking about it, but I was kind of dismissive of what she said with my face until she started saying that they were like hanging out. And you said it as well. They were hanging out, having dinners. So I left it a little bit more of a believer than I started. And I always like to give a gradient of where it could be. It could be on one end where it's just a complete criminal act where these doctors are aware of what's going on and actively contributing to the deception that's taking place. Or it could be somewhere in the middle where this doctor is fond of Gypsy and Dee Dee, wants to help them, thinks they're good people, maybe doesn't necessarily dot all their I's, cross all their T's, which is why Dee Dee and Gypsy are so willing to go to this person because they're not a very good doctor. They're not very thorough. So it fits their narrative because they're basically saying, it's almost like an accountant, right? It's like, oh, I have all these deductions and do you need to see my receipts? And the accountant's like, nah, you're good. I trust you. You know what I mean? So it could be there, or it could be on the other end of the spectrum where it's just like the doctor is just completely terrible and they just don't know what they're doing. And this is just an egregious case of malpractice. So I don't know where it is. It could be anywhere in there. I will admit that the fact that these doctors, this doctor in particular, Beckham, how do you say his name?
Beckerman.
That he's out at dinners with them. He's contributing to them getting the house. It could be for, a true, genuine reason where he just wants to help this family in need and he was bamboozled by them as well. Or it could be what Fancy is suggesting. I just didn't hear enough to get there at this point.
I was even wondering, was it for the hospital? Because, he works at Children's Mercy in Kansas City. And this is a Children's Mercy publication. This 2009 article comes out in, and he's like, Gypsy's getting the best care with the best doctors. Could it be like, okay, bringing Gypsy and Dee Dee to our hospital and then having this for like marketing purposes?
Yeah, publicity.
This like kind of made for TV movie family unit, right? You've got this single mother and she's self-sacrificing, has devoted her entire life to her sick child. You've got this sick child who has this sweet little voice and she's dressed in princess dresses and she's so kind and sweet and upbeat and happy, even though she's got these horrible medical conditions. And she's like the shining example of what a sick kid should look like, like hopeful throughout it all. And then on top of that, they're Hurricane Katrina survivors, dude, right? It's like they're so disenfranchised in every single way. And now this perfect little family unit is going to bring a lot of attention to your hospital, your profession. It could
and
be
by the way, what type of grants are they getting for all this? That's
exactly.
That's a big thing. It's a big thing.
That could be, and someone might have to look into that, or maybe it's not important for someone to look into. But either way, these are doctors. They're not dumb people.
No, the behavior raises some eyebrows, without a doubt.
All right, so now they have the sleep clinic visit. Now on February 2nd, 2005. They're going to do a sleep study.
So on 2/2/2005, they do the sleep study. It comes back as, yes, she does have breathing problems while she's sleeping. There is some different things that come back in that. It does show. And there is other times along the way, even in Louisiana, that it is notated that they believe that Gypsy herself is malingering. She's holding saliva in her mouth and she's letting it pool there and they don't know why. And they don't say Dee Dee's doing it. They made certain that they wrote in there that it was Gypsy who they thought was doing it, but they didn't know why.
So basically, they do the sleep study and they confirm, yes, she does have breathing problems when she sleeps, which confirms that from a medical standpoint, that she does need that CPAP machine. This is not something that her mother gave her to just, and similar to the feeding tube, right? Because I saw a lot of comments from part one where people were like, listen, I'm a doctor or I'm a nurse, and I can tell you for a fact that doctors don't just put feeding tubes in a child simply because the mother's like, she needs it. They will make sure there's a medical need for it.
They tried several other things before they did that. And then to further that becomes, in my opinion, eventually, maybe she outgrows that failure to thrive kind of thing. And she starts to be able, her digestive system actually starts to catch up on its own, because that is what happens with this chromosome disorder. It delays things, and sometimes things you grow out of and some other things you still have, right? But that's one of the ones that they tend to grow out of, is this failure to thrive. Their developmental system, their digestive system, things like that begin to catch up. So when it starts to catch up, she probably didn't use the feeding tube very often, but she continues to have all these mouth problems. So the feeding tube was there in case, okay, well, if we get to a point where she can't eat for a while, or we've got to do this surgery, it's fine for this little tiny little Mickey button to be right here on her stomach. And it's a very outward display. And the other thing about that is, if you're not the doctor that placed that, much like people who go to an orthodontist have braces put on their teeth, and then other orthodontists are very leery of like taking them off because they don't know the work or how long. Right. So they'll refuse sometimes. And so it could have easily been doctors just not wanting to take it out. And Gypsy never challenged it, because I guarantee you, it was a way to show, look, I've got this Mickey button. I'm really sick. Right. So I think that became part part of the con, but when it was placed, it was absolutely medically necessary. And I think it was medically necessary for many of the years of her life for various different reasons and problems that she has, but she probably didn't need it all the time.
All right, that's a lot of information. There's more to come. I hope everyone's bearing with us. If you have questions about anything that you want cleared up in the comments, let us know in the comment section. We will both try to answer, and I know the Fancy will be in there as well, answering any questions that you guys have. So every device that we use now is just getting smarter and smarter. You know, you've got smartwatches, even our light bulbs are Wi-Fi enabled, and the world keeps getting smarter. So your e-commerce business should too. Whether you're looking for incredible efficiency for your business, or if your business has outgrown your old shipping solutions, ShipStation is going to help you take the next step that's going to bring you to the next level. And personally, Derek does most of the shipping for our business, Criminal Coffee, out of the Rhode Island location. So I'm going to throw it to him because he's got experience with ShipStation. I know that it is integral to our business.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier to just go in there. It gets you the best prices. It tells you what type of box you have to pack it in. It does everything for you, basically. All you do is go in there, fulfill your orders, and ShipStation takes care of the rest, prints out the labels, all that good stuff. So it really makes our whole process that much more seamless.
Absolutely. And that's really what you want in business, right? Because when you own your own business, there's just constantly things being thrown at you that you didn't expect. So any place you can save time and take something off your plate is a place you should go to. And you can lead your business into the future with technology built to save you from extra costs and headaches. ShipStation is the fastest, most affordable way to ship products to your customers with discounts of up to 89% off UPS, DHL Express, and USPS rates. And 98% of companies that stick with ShipStation for a year become customers for life. We are one of them. You can be one of them too. Derek's going to tell you how.
That's right. If you have a small business, you need ShipStation. So lead your e-commerce business into a smarter future with the shipping software that delivers. Switch to ShipStation today by going to shipstation.com/crimeweekly to sign up for your free 60-day trial. Once again, that's shipstation.com/crimeweekly.
So now we're going into August of 2005, specifically August 23rd, 2005, Katrina hits. Now, after Katrina, as we know, Dee Dee and Gypsy, they end up in Missouri. And this is when Dr. Robert Steele, becomes Gypsy's pediatrician. And he's out of the same hospital as Dr. Beckerman. Now, the interesting thing is, you will see that Dr. Steele, and he's been interviewed, I believe it was the prison confessions of Gypsy Rose where he was interviewed, and he said, I didn't have these medical records. They were lost in Katrina. And when he says the medical records, he's speaking specifically of the medical records before 2005, the Louisiana medical records. He claims he doesn't have them. So when Dee Dee says Gypsy has muscular dystrophy, he goes along with that, even though in the medical records from Louisiana, it says that she was tested for that. It was negative. When Dee Dee mentions, possible cancer diagnosis, Dr. Steele says, well, it was troubling because she didn't know what kind of cancer or what kind of treatment Gypsy had been under. And yet it still sort of gets like pushed along as if it's true and accurate. And he says this happened because he did not have the medical records, so he only had Dee Dee Blanchard's word to go off of. But according to Fancy Miss Sally, and she says this is in the medical records, Dr. Robert Steele requested the medical records from Louisiana on September 23rd, 2005, and he received them. So he had these medical records, and it is a full 2 years before he sends those records to any other doctor. And that doctor, when he finally does send those records 2 years later, is Dr. Bernard Flasterstein, who is a pediatric neurologist. And we're going to get there, but that's 2007.
On 8/23 of 05, Katrina hits. They end up in the Superdome. That's the shaved head. They get airlifted out. And I think Gypsy did go looking for a Missouri doctor. I think they really there was some things that were happening. Dee Dee was coming up on certain like bad check charges and other things were happening. And I do think that, there was maybe an incidence where they were getting found out that possibly, they're they're creating scams, not necessarily medical fraud, because up until this point, there's no medical fraud really. But Katrina happens, she signs this doctor, they airlift her out. Beckerman's on scene, like immediately. Boom, he's right there at the emergency room. Like, okay, how did that happen? And Dr. Steele is at the actual emergency room, and he becomes her primary care doctor. And so on 9/23, 1 month later, he requests and he receives the Louisiana records. And he lies about this.
Yes, I was just going to ask you that. Yeah. He says Dee Dee doesn't have the records. He has to basically only go on what she's telling him because he does not have access to the records because they were lost in Katrina. But you're saying he got them.
He has them. I have it. Where I found it was actually in his files, and it was at least 204 pages of information from Tulane. And the biggest record inside of that is the muscles biopsy, the thoracic spine, and all of that ruled out muscular dystrophy. Yet he continued to chart it in her chart the entire time, which is medical fraud. And that is him committing medical fraud, not Dee Dee committing medical fraud.
Listening to what Fancy's saying, you can only put so much on incompetence and complacency. You can say, listen, these doctors, they got a lot of patients, they lose files, they get kind of thrown in with the mix of other files, and you have all these things transpiring where they might have, there's things that we might not know. Did they move locations? Did they change practices? All these things where they may come out and say, this is why we didn't do this for 2 years, or this is why we had these files and yet said we didn't. But when you hear Fancy talk, this is what I was talking about when I said a lot of people are going to have strong opinions on this in the comments. So where I land on it, I don't know. I don't know how you justify. I don't know how you explain it in any other way other than there is some type of deliberate act taking place. But maybe if we heard from Dr. Steele, we'd feel differently.
Even if it's a deliberate act of, I kind of knew what was happening, but I looked the other way.
Right. That's still criminal in nature, right? Like if you know what's happening, you're an accomplice, right? If you're contributing to the fraud, that's an issue. And now I don't know how far we go down this road, and I'm not talking about Dr. Steele's specifically, but are there doctors who may do certain things in order to get payments from insurance companies and things like that? We know that's true. I'm not saying that's the case with Dr. Steele. I don't know the guy. I haven't investigated him personally, but we know that happens all the time. So I don't know what's going on behind closed doors here. Fancy has a strong opinion on it. She supports it with a lot of information. It's up to you to decide where you fall on it.
So I was even thinking like, okay, there's times, and Fancy says this a few times throughout the interview, where when doctors would sort of get suspicious and they would say something, the other people like at the hospital or around would be like, hey, like just, shh, not with these two. All right, they've been through so much. Like this girl does have legitimate medical issues. Like, let's just, chill here. We don't need to be raising the alarm. Was this an issue where the doctors like Beckerman and Steele kind of felt that way? Like, we like them. We know there's something weird going on here, but also this girl is actually sick, needs medical care. Her mom might just be a hypochondriac. There is so much going on with Katrina, and they came from Louisiana, and there's a bunch of scattered medical records. Maybe these doctors know what they're talking about, but at the end of the day, none of them expected this to end with the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard. And then when it did, and then all the networks came calling, Dr. Steele and other doctors like him would get in front of the cameras and be like, I mean, we didn't have their records, and all we had to go on was what Dee Dee said, and almost like I'm going to try to cover my own ass thing because I don't necessarily feel like I did anything wrong, and it was kind of just like everyone was on the same page, just like let these two kind of go along and not make too many waves. But nobody expected that Dee Dee Blanchard was going to be murdered as a result of this. And nobody thought that that was going to be the outcome. And now that it is, we all kind of feel a little foolish, and we're all trying to point the fingers and be like, it wasn't me. I didn't know. I didn't have the medical records.
Well, that's the other thing too. The doctors, let's say they are involved in some way, or they're just being, whatever the case may be, You don't expect this to happen. And once it does, now there's a magnifying glass on it. Now everything's under a microscope and everyone's being questioned as far as their behaviors and their actions throughout this entire ordeal, because Gypsy's going to come out and say, listen, I'm a victim of this. This was happening all these years. So everyone's going to look into it, including investigators. So that's where, if a physician is doing something that maybe they shouldn't be doing, this is where it can come back to bite them in the ass.
Let's continue on. And now we're in October of 2005, up to October 6th, to be specific. And this is when Gypsy has a physical therapy evaluation.
In 2005, there is a physical therapy evaluation done. Her birth date is now 7/27 of 93. So we've upped her, we've aged her down by 2 years at this point. And Gypsy herself reports she can propel a manual wheelchair about 50 feet. She states she does not transfer on her own at all. And these are all statements that they said Gypsy made, not Dee Dee, Gypsy. On the mat, they noted that the patient can come to a long sitting position, but moves as a paraplegic. They also said patient demonstrates full range in bilateral lower extremities. They do say that there is some supination and inversion of the bilateral feet. So that's meaning the feet are not placed correctly. That she demonstrates that there's tightness in her back and her hip flexors. And they think that she needs a new wheelchair with a bilateral ankle foot orthosis, and she needs a stander. So that would be something she could stand up with. And she needs some more tests. And this is the first time that they start saying again, once we get to Missouri, they say again that they think she could be malingering some of her range of movement for her legs.
So they mean that Gypsy herself is kind of pretending things are worse than they are.
Right. This is a time where she could have easily shown the people that she was there that, hey, look, I can move my legs a little bit more than my mom says. She could have said something right there. And nope, she didn't. She went along with it, and continued to do it. And there's even like a note about her arguing about whether she can do something or not.
All right. So now we come to 2005, right? After this physical therapy sort of exam, between that and some point in 2007, everything's pretty quiet medically. So once again, we have a couple year gap where Gypsy and Dee Dee are not constantly going into the hospital. There's not these big operations or tests happening. And some might say this suggests that Dee Dee didn't suffer from Munchhausen-by-proxy, because at this point, she's still getting free stuff. They're still going on trips. They're still doing all this stuff, living the high life. They don't need to be going into the doctors and doing all of this stuff. This kind of supports the malingering conclusion, which is they were in it for the financial gain and to get, attention from the community and to see what they could get from the community at large, the people who had, charitable hearts. So at this point, Gypsy's kind of just being a normal kid.
From 2005 to 2007, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot of anything because they were in Aurora.
At this point in Aurora, 2 years in Aurora, Gypsy's pretty much living a normal life. Like you said, she's out in the neighborhood. People see her walking around. There's not a ton of medical things happening. She's pretty much just going about life as if she would any other time. And then in April of 2007, they have an audiology consultation. And during this consultation, the doctor, Dr. Way, he mentions that there's 2 dates of birth given for Gypsy in her medical records. And it's odd because none of this makes sense. And this is not the first time it's happened where Gypsy Rose's date of birth is all over the place. They're saying she's one age. They're giving multiple years that she's born. And it seems like the doctors don't make anything of this, even though it's weird, right? Like as the parent, you might not have her birth certificate. You might not have her medical records. Those things may have been lost in Katrina, but you would certainly remember which year she was born. And why did no doctor at any point say to Dee Dee, hey, we got like 55 different dates of birth for your kid in here. Can you let us know which one is accurate so we can make note of that?
Yeah, that whole thing was throwing me off. Sometimes I think with these cases, my date of birth has been listed wrong on multiple things. You find out when you run your credit reports. You don't know what these doctors are doing, but again, just like what I said a little while ago, as far as Dr. Steele not reporting that he had the files, the medical records. You want to believe it's just stupidity, but it gets really hard in totality to think that this is all just one big mistake.
I mean, you understand there's a lot going on with Gypsy. She's probably got a ton of medical records because she's had on quote unquote issues since she was born. There's a lot happening, and yet if you can't nail down something very basic like the date of birth, then what hope do we have for the rest of this? You know?
Yeah, it's not good. Exactly. If you can't get the date of birth right, how are you going to get a cancer diagnosis right? It's not a good look.
Yes, and we're going to see that Dr. Steele, Gypsy's pediatrician, he said that he did have Gypsy tested for cancer. The test came back normal, with no evidence of cancer. He also said there wasn't anything obvious to suggest a muscular disorder, which is why we're going to see that he recommends that Gypsy see Dr. Bernardo Flasterstein, a pediatric neurologist, in 2007. We're going to talk about Dr. Flasterstein in a second, but before she sees Dr. Flasterstein in 2007, Dee Dee's going to have this audiology consultation. She's also going to get dental surgery because she's, losing a lot of teeth for a variety of reasons. And so she's going to get free dentures, and she's going to have some ear, nose, and throat procedures, such as having tubes put in her ears because she's getting recurrent ear infections, things like that.
So in 2007, she sees an audiologist, and that's Dr. Wee. And there are two different dates listed. There is the original date of 7/27/91, and there's also 7/27/1995. So now we're 4 years younger, and they list her also as 13 years old. So it's all confusing right there. Like, how does this happen? I don't understand the changing birth dates, but it is eventually what catches up to them in 2009 and flags them for fraud.
I think I saw this that they listed her as 13, but she was really 16.
Mm-hmm.
And her weight at that time was like 98 pounds, under 100 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And the height box on the medical records is left open. So I guess I would say, like, for a 16-year-old, being under 100 pounds, it would be considered, not average weight, right? Am I wrong?
Not really. She was 4'11", and so for somebody as little as she is, and with the chromosome disorder she has, if one of the actual things is being underweight and being smaller, so no, she's not she's not malnourished. She's just a very tiny little thing.
So it's kind of weird that they give two birthdays, 91 and 95. You said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then they give her age as 13, which wouldn't be accurate for either of those years.
Either of those years.
Right.
Right. And they list some of the surgeries known. So this is that supposedly Dee Dee says that there have been permanent ear tubes put in, and they were placed 4 years earlier, and she's concerned that these tubes are coming out. I personally, and Colleen backed me up on this, there is not a permanent freaking ear tube that you put in. These ear tubes are designed to be put in, and once they do what they're supposed to do, the ear naturally pushes them out. And so this was one of the things in our podcast that Colleen was like, she had to have been puncturing her ear or whatever she was doing. Like, it had to have been. But that was because we didn't know that it was a symptom of the chromosome disorder, and we couldn't figure out why she kept having chronic problems. Well, it's still something she has a problem with today. She still has a hearing problem.
Yeah, so the medical records state recurrent ear infection since birth. Tubes had been placed in her ears twice, the first set when she was 2 years old, and then T-tubes placed in 2004, which became blocked, leading to more ear infections and then some ear bleeding. And then the records say that at that point, Gypsy was scheduled for a BMTT placement on May 31st. This is where a small opening would be made in the eardrum so the tubes can be placed into the openings on each side, and this lets airflow behind the eardrums, which would have either the fluid drain or dry up, which is what you want. And then they talked about Gypsy's past medical, surgical, and birth history. And it says Gypsy had been a paraplegic since birth, which caused her to be in a wheelchair. But then later in these same medical records, it says, well, the mom says since birth, but she also doesn't really remember if it was since birth. So they're kind of just, at this point, these doctors are sort of just going along with what Dee Dee is saying because they do not have the records from Louisiana. Dr. Steele has them.
Dr. Steele has them and he does not share them with anyone else. Exactly. So that's one of my problems is that he doesn't share these with the other doctors, and the other doctors notate this over and over again. We don't have records. We don't have records. We don't have records. Dr. Steele had them the whole freaking time. He got them a month after she landed in freaking Missouri, so why do they not have the records, Dr. Steele? I really want to know.
And these records also state that Gypsy does have muscular dystrophy. Her mother believes it would be the type limb girdle. And yeah, so they're going, even though she in Louisiana was tested for muscular dystrophy and it came back negative, since they don't have those records, they're just going to put in the medical records. Well, her mom says she has muscular dystrophy.
And they're assuming, since Dr. Steele is putting it in his notes, that it must be true, right? So that's what they're going with. And okay, so in the same episode or the same doctor's visit, they also state that she wears bilateral hearing aids. She gets the first miracle ear in Louisiana at 5 years old. She tells a story about that, and I used to believe that this story was 100% true, and I thought, this is where we see it. This is where Dee Dee's really doing something to make this happen.
So we're going to take our last break, and then we're going to come back, and Fancy's going to continue on with what was going on with Gypsy Rose in 2007. And like I said, 2007 is the year that Gypsy Rose meets Dr. Bernardo Flasterstein, which if you've seen the documentaries and the docuseries, Dr. Flasterstein has been featured in these, and he seems to feel really bad, to feel really guilty that he missed red flags, that he saw them, but he didn't necessarily pursue them in the way.
He didn't act on them.
Yeah, which, I will say I believe that he is genuinely not feeling great about it. So we're going to take our last break, and we'll be right back. Have you ever legitimately wasted hours a week searching grocery stores for the best, freshest fruits, veggies, and meats, and you're still disappointed? I know that happens all the time, and that's why something like Fresh Direct is an experience that's going to make finding fresh produce and fresh meat absolutely a night and day experience. Fresh Direct is a farm-to-kitchen food sourced directly from farmers, fishermen, and ranchers and delivered straight to your door. And because of that, you're paying for the quality of the food rather than just having someone go shopping in a store for you. Fresh Direct is the only true replacement for a grocery store because they offer a wide variety of products from pantry staples to specialty items, all at great prices. Now, the catch is, because of the freshness and the quality, and because Fresh Direct wants to keep that freshness and quality, this is only available in certain parts of the tri-state area. So you can go to the website, you can type in your zip code, and you can see if Fresh Direct does deliver to you. And if they do, consider yourself one of the lucky ones, because I wish that I had that option.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I thought you were going to be in the area, but I don't think you are. But I'm definitely not. But yeah, they may expand eventually, but they're really focused on freshness, and that's why they want to make sure they can get your order to you as fast as possible, and this is the best way they can do it.
I know I have talked to people who have used it, and they say that the flavor, the value, the freshness, the quality is not comparable to anything that you could just go into a grocery store and get. So I'm so jealous. Hopefully they open up a little bit more. But for now.
Well, I'm going to tell you how to get this food
if
you are in the tri-state area, even though we're a little jealous of you. When I was talking to the Fresh Direct people, they basically said you could order fish and that morning it may be getting caught. That's how fresh it is. So for over 20 years, Fresh Direct has been delivering the freshest fruits, vegetables, and meats to the tri-state area. Don't take our word for it. Try it to believe it with $50 off your first order. Just go to freshdirect.com and use our code CRIMEWEEKLY. That's freshdirect.com, code CRIMEWEEKLY. And for new customers, you get $50 off your first order. Terms and restrictions apply. See terms for details.
So I think mental health help and therapy and things like that. I think everybody should be doing it. Nobody is, really completely healthy and healed. Nobody is completely okay mentally, and that's fine. We're humans. We shouldn't be. But it's always nice to have somebody to talk to, somebody who's trained to help you through any low points in your life. What is great about Talkspace is that it's personalized treatment where you can meet online with your therapist from anywhere. You can even have the ability to text your therapist at any time if something comes up and you can't wait till your next session. I also think it's great because therapy can be incredibly expensive, especially if you're going on a regular basis, but Talkspace is affordable and in-network with most insurance providers. Plus, most insurance members have a $0 copay, which is amazing. And like I said, Talkspace makes getting help very convenient. You don't have to leave your house. You can stay in the comfort of your own home, find a place where you're comfortable, and talk to your therapist over video. So Derek's going to tell you how you can check Talkspace out for yourself. Talkspace is the leading virtual therapy provider that makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable.
Yeah, and we can never take our mental health for granted. It's as important, if not more important, than our physical health, in my opinion. Because if you're not right up here, everything else is going to fall by the wayside as well. So as a listener or viewer of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/crimeweekly and enter promo code SPACE80. That's space, SPACE 80, all one word there. To match with a licensed therapist today, just go to Talkspace.com/crimeweekly and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for this show. That's Talkspace.com/crimeweekly, promo code SPACE80.
All right, we're back. So we'll continue on with the medical history in 2007.
Nothing really happens again until about 2007 is where we start seeing, some more stuff start happening. Now they've got the Habitat house. They're there. They've moved the care to Springfield from Kansas City, so that it's easier for Dee Dee to get her there because Dee Dee's handicapped at this point too. She's fully disabled at this point. They've recognized her as fully disabled, and she's collecting Social Security for herself as well as for Gypsy. And I want to make note, a lot of people ask me about this. Why has Medicaid never charged Gypsy with fraud? And the reason why is because everything that actually was done medically was necessary. So there's nothing for Medicaid to go after her for medical fraud with them because she had all these problems. So she has her dental surgery. Again, Dee Dee at this appointment on 4/26/07, we've got conflicting dates. We've got now 7/27/95 of her birth date, 7/27/94. She's listed as 12 years old, then she's listed as 13 years old, all in the same freaking document. Like, this is where I get with the doctors and I'm like, what in the world was going on with you? Why is this happening? And so they say that there's an advance directive on the file, but they can't find it. Again, Dee Dee claims memory loss after a car accident a few months prior. Now, we all know it happened in Louisiana, but it did not happen in Missouri. So here she is again. Oh, I don't know. And they notate at this dental surgery, which I thought was really weird, that there was some purposeful movement of extremities. And I don't know why that's in a dental note, but it is, and that's so weird. So then there's another ear, nose, and throat follow-up in 5/15/07. We've got, the date of 7/27/95. This is where the donut lick allergy is mentioned, and it's questioned about her having a sugar allergy, which is not a thing. You can have an intolerance to sugar. You can be diabetic and have, not produce enough insulin to, keep your sugar down. But being allergic to sugar itself, that's not a thing. It's not a thing. So that's where she gets the whole idea of, oh, I ate a cupcake and my mom had all my teeth ripped out. No, that is not what happened.
Well, it sounds like some of her teeth fell out from the removal of her salivary glands.
It could be some of that, but she was already having very severe problems with her teeth from a very early age, even before the salivary glands are removed. In fact, the salivary glands were removed because of some of that. They thought that would help cut down on the saliva. And if you can see her today, she still produces an excessive amount of saliva. It's why she's always licking her lips like this, because she's always got extra saliva in her mouth. But some of it could have been attributed to removing them, but they were already crumbling and falling apart as her baby teeth, and then it continued on into doing so with her adult teeth. That can be several things. One, there's bad dental hygiene going on. Number two, the water down in Louisiana during that period of time did not have like the fluoride or anything in it. So a lot of them have dental problems down there. Her family all have dental problems. And so it could be genetic. And then on top of that, again, it's another thing that ties into this chromosome disorder and them having these very soft, crumbly type of rotting teeth. And they were rotting out of her head when they were removed. They were not healthy teeth that her mother just had yanked out because they were putting some Orajel down there. No, that's not what was happening. No.
That is what that is what Gypsy claimed, Derek, by the way, that she didn't need to have her salivary glands removed, that they had removed her glands due to excessive saliva production, drooling, and that she wasn't having any of those issues. And what would happen is that Dee Dee would put Orajel on her gums and on her teeth and in her mouth before they went to the doctor so that she would be drooling.
To make her drool more.
Yeah.
Yes. That wasn't the case. That was not the case.
How do we know that for certain?
Because of the other notes from other doctors and what was happening with her teeth. They tried other things. They tried Botox for many years. That didn't work. They tried doing some other things, as well as with like her eye surgeries. They tried all the other things first. Like they tried patching it. They tried wearing glasses, not wearing glasses, all the different things. So these doctors were doing the right things all the way along. And then they would decide, okay, well, none of that worked. So let's take this measure to go ahead and surgically operate on whatever it is.
Well, my thing is, though, like you have a situation here where we've proven, as we talk about the history, where there has been issues, actual physical issues in most cases where in the beginning, it seemed like Dee Dee would just do certain things to maybe embellish it to get Gypsy what she wanted, right? Isn't it possible that two things could be true where all of these complications that you're talking about due to actual issues are happening, but to embellish those issues, to make it a bigger thing than it is, Dee Dee's throwing Orajel on her gums to enhance the drooling? I mean, we can't say for certain that didn't happen.
Well, I can't say for certain it didn't happen, but I can say for certain that the doctors kept checking for those things.
Like Orajel and stuff on her gums?
Yes. Well, they were looking for what were the causes, and they were finding what the causes were. They found their causes, and no one in there ever indicates, oh my goodness, I think the mother might be putting Orajel on there, because that's going to only be a temporary thing. That's not going to be something that just rots your teeth out from the inside out. So even if she was putting it there so there's extra saliva in one moment, they did all the tests to prove that it wasn't just occasionally occurring, or it wasn't something that the mother was manipulating. It was happening. Again, I still think that most of the embellishment was the two main things of cancer and muscular dystrophy. And again, it was only on the outside to get financial gain. There is no indication anywhere in here, not once, that the mother is doing anything. The only time they mention this is when she goes to see Dr. Flasterstein, and he does get the records as well from Missouri, from Louisiana. And that's where he knows that muscular dystrophy has been ruled out. So he doesn't understand why it's still being charted. And the mother is saying this. And that's when he says, well, maybe it is Munchhausen-by-proxy. Maybe that's what we need to figure out.
This was 2007, right?
Yeah, that's in 2007. So we're still in 2007 at the ENT, the donut lick allergy. And then again, they say that she has reflexes, despite the fact that she's supposed to have paraplegia.
Okay, I want to stop for a second and reset the deck, because we're over 2 hours into this episode and we're really hammering home the point of everything involving Gypsy Rose and her medical conditions or lack thereof, right? And you guys saw in that clip me push back on Fancy a little bit, because we know that there are going to be people who feel one way about this and others who feel a different way. And the reason why everything we're talking about now with Fancy is so important to go over every little detail as far as the conditions that Gypsy was experiencing is because we all know why we're here. The title of the episode tells you it's about Dee Dee Blanchard and her murder. And what this all this information that we're talking about, what this sets the table for is a potential motive for the prosecution, but also a potential defense for Gypsy and Nicholas Godejohn. So we really have to go through it all because we have to figure out whether or not we feel that Gypsy was in fact sick and she had this condition, this chromosome disorder condition known as microdeletion 1q21.1, right, which would have explained a lot of these symptoms that she was being treated for, therefore making Dee Dee's care and her attention to them warranted. Or is this a situation where it's Munchausen syndrome by proxy and she's creating these issues in order to garner some type of sympathy and therefore financial gain and housing and all these other things? This right here is the whole crossroad in this case, because as we continue on into the series and we go on into the murder and the specifics of the murder, it's all going to come back to this. Because at the end of the day, if you believe that Gypsy was actually sick, then you're probably going to feel like Gypsy should still be in prison. But if you feel like Gypsy was being abused and was being taken advantage of, and her mother was at the root of all of these issues, then you may feel completely different about the murder and feel that she served enough time or maybe shouldn't have served time at all. It really does remind me of the Menendez series, but with this, we have a lot of documentation regarding the medical history that we can overview and kind of dissect, where with the Menendez brothers, it was more just accounts from other people in their life.
And the pictures, we saw the pictures of
the pictures.
yeah.
Yes, the pictures, but you have a lot here to go over. So I don't know how everyone's feeling at this point, but this can seem like we're really getting into the weeds, but it's absolutely necessary because this is everything. This will dictate a lot of your final opinions on this case.
So now we're in the summer of 2007, August of 2007, when Gypsy goes in to see Dr. Flasterstein, who is a pediatric neurologist. And Dr. Flasterstein said that although Dee Dee told him about multiple medical conditions that Gypsy had, she wasn't able to give him details about these conditions. So he basically ordered a whole new series of tests, including an MRI of Gypsy's spine and brain, which we know she's already had these before. And those tests came back normal, as they did before. Her muscles and her muscle strength were normal. She did not have cerebral palsy. And he knew that Gypsy should be able to walk around and move with no issues. Dr. Flasterstein also claims that while Gypsy was with him in his office, he told her, hey, based on these tests, you can stand up, you can get out of your wheelchair. And so Gypsy did this in front of him. And then Dr. Flasterstein said that Dee Dee became upset when this happened. She stormed out of the room. And at that point, he suspected that Dee Dee suffered from Munchhausen-by-proxy. This was in 2007, and this is when Dr. Flasterstein writes a letter to Dr. Steele, who's Gypsy's pediatrician, who, remember, has had her medical records for 2 years by this point. And he's like, hey, something's going on here.
In 8/21 of 07, and I think she was seen one time before this, Flasterstein sends this letter to Steele. And the first line is, this is the first one. So 8/21/07, letter from Flasterstein to Steele. First line, the mother is not a good historian. Her birth date is 7/27/93. She's 14 years old, listed in this. And the complaint is muscular dystrophy and epilepsy. So there's something listed about a paternal brother that has mental problems. That's not true. There is a maternal grandmother who has, I never know how to say that. It's like Charcot-Marie tooth. So it's like it's something that is likened to French people and their teeth being this problem. It causes nerve problems. It can cause hemophilia. It can also cause difficulty walking. So that could have been a reasoning for the problems, but it comes back that, that's only the maternal grandmother, and Gypsy doesn't have that. So they do some neuro exams, and they again do show diffused hypotonia, but unusual distribution of her weakness. So again, there is a reason. He just doesn't know why there's a reason. So he goes ahead and he orders exactly the same thing: MRIs of the spine, MRIs of the brain, and an EEG. So on 9/24, he does that. He does an MRI with contrast of the brain, the cervical, the thoracic, and the lumbar spine. And he says that there's no intracranial abnormality. And in his notes here, he says that the MRIs were normal. And he spoke to a doctor in Louisiana, and she specifically remembers Dr. Garcia clearly reported the fact that Gypsy Rose does not have a muscular dystrophy. And so this is sent to Dr. Steele. Dr. Steele sees this, does absolutely nothing. She never goes back to Flasterstein. Flasterstein says in Mommy Dead and Dearest that he tried to talk to other doctors about this because he was concerned. And he was told by hospital staff and other doctors not to report it, even though he is a mandated reporter. He should have reported it. He didn't, because they told him that these were a special pair and they needed to be handled with kid gloves, and nobody was going to believe him. And it takes Dr. Steele another 2 years. Supposedly, he states that he's the one who called it into DCFS. I could not find that information. And the HBO people notated in that letter from them to Christy and Rod, that they could not find confirmation that he did. And in the actual report, they state that it was an anonymous woman caller. So he calls it in 2009. They get flagged in 2009 at the Springfield location, and immediately Dr. Beckerman and Dr. Steele move her care back to Kansas City at this point. And so from 2009 on is when she's seeing the doctor, Le Pochon, who actually identifies the microdeletion. So he's driving up there, and everything is going, the reason that they left that hospital is, first of all, the hospital sends out, the CPS comes to the door, 2 officers, two CPS workers. They talk to Gypsy, they talk to Dee Dee, they look around the house. It does seem that Dee Dee, they note that it does seem that Gypsy has some cognitive issues. They were able to identify that she was over the age of 18. Not only did she have an ID that had her age over the age of 18, her original birth certificate was presented to them to show that she was over the age of 18. They ask her if she's okay. Does she feel safe? She says fine. They say, do you want to leave? She says no. And they close the case because they're not able to do anything because she's an adult. So if he called it in 2007, when he first got this information from Dr. Flasterstein, they could maybe have figured it out and helped her at that point if it was true, but he doesn't. He waits until she's over the age of 18, and then he calls it in. And then CPS is like, well, we're sorry, we can't do anything. And at that time, then the hospitals wants guardianship papers. They realize that Gypsy's over the age of 18. They do not want a power of attorney, which is what GD tried to give them. So the hospital says, nope, not good enough. We don't want a power of attorney. We actually want the guardianship from an actual court mandating it. Dee Dee says, no, I'm not going to do that. And Dr. Steele and Dr. Meckerman then move her care to Kansas City.
All right. So why was she not being cared for in Kansas City at that time and she was in Springfield? Because Dr. Steele and Dr. Beckerman were both in Kansas City, right?
Right. But they also had offices in Springfield as well. So they had dual hospitals and things like that they can have privileges at. And it was easier for her to be seen in Springfield because that's where she lived. Kansas City is about 2 hours away.
So they're basically like, all right, people here in Springfield are getting a little sus. Let's get out of town. Okay.
Then they send her to Dr. Le Pochon. Dr. Le Pochon starts talking about, she's got all these erroneous things. I'd like to do more testing. And they do some other things and it comes back inconclusive. They can't figure it out. She's treating the epilepsy. She's treating the different things. And we do not know one way or another whether whether Gypsy actually has epilepsy or not. We do not know. I believed her when she told me that she did not. And, because there were times where her seizure medications were off, but there are also times where the seizure medications are not off.
Okay, so we have gotten to a point now where we're at around the 2009 year. Now, I want to go back a little bit and talk about this CPS visit that Fancy referred to. And how did this CPS visit get triggered? Well, Dr. Steele says he called because he was starting to get suspicious. And as Fancy said, and this is in the records, it was recorded that it was an anonymous woman who called. So maybe Dr. Steele had someone call for him. Maybe it was someone in his office. Who knows? Either way, someone at that hospital was like, what's happening? There's something odd happening. CPS shows up. As Fancy states, by this point, Gypsy's 18 years old. She's legally an adult. So this isn't really a CPS kind of issue, right? They knew that she was 18. And as Fancy said, her legitimate birth certificate, which got lost in Katrina, was presented to the police and the CPS agents at the time of this visit, showing she was 18. And they talked to her and they're like, hey, you're 18. So are you good? We can't really do much, but we can ask you if you're okay. Gypsy knew how old she was, is what I'm trying to say. Gypsy knew, and we're going to get into it a lot in the next episode. The next episode is going to be a wild ride. Okay, but Gypsy knew how old she was. And so when she's sitting in that police station and they're like, oh, how old are you? And she says 19. She knew very well she wasn't 19. She knew that she was 23. So this is kind of going along the lines of, okay, these people are asking you, do you need help? Do you need out? And she's like, nope, I'm good.
I'm good. All
she
set
could
over
have
here.
said, yes, I do need help. I do
Exactly.
need out. My mother's trapping me. She's forcing me to be in this wheelchair. This bitch is shaving my head every other day. Get me the hell out of here. But she's like, no, I'm good. And some people can say, okay, this is like a Stockholm syndrome thing.
Of
This
course.
is all
And that
she
could
ever
be
knew.
the case.
It could be the case, right? But we don't know if it was or not. And that's kind of what we're trying to determine here.
I'm writing all these notes and I'm sitting here saying, what do we have here? It's never just black and white.
It's not.
Is it a situation
it would be
where
so nice if it was.
No, there's when you're talking about the percentage of guilt, I can promise you that in most cases, including this one, it's not going to be 100% to zero. For some people who are extreme, they might say, no, Dee Dee was the adult, Gypsy was the child, 100. It's not the way it works. It evolves as they get older, and the children are know right from wrong and their ability to go along with it, and if they're presented with opportunities to get out of it. So this is very important. And you do ask the question, yeah, why didn't Gypsy say something at the time? But I could easily combat that and debate anyone on that by saying, listen, this is all she knows. This is the woman she loves, being her mother. And she didn't realize at that moment, even though there was something wrong, she didn't realize the significance of it and that there was hope for her. So therefore, in her mind, nothing was wrong. She was enjoying the way life was because that's what she was programmed and conditioned to believe.
And maybe that's all she knew. Yeah.
That's all she knew. And so in that point, she's still a victim. She's been manipulated and brainwashed, but she's a victim.
But how do you go from being 18 and you're so happy with this life and this is all you know, to a couple years later being so miserable, so unhappy, such a prisoner that you orchestrate your mother's murder? What changes in that time? And what we're going to pose to you that changed is that Gypsy, as an adult, now she wants to start living her own life. She wants to start having some independence. She wants to start dating. She's getting sexual. She's got things going on that she wants to take part in. And her mother is like, nah, slow your roll. So Fancy posed this. And I don't know if we're going to be able to put that part of this interview in, at least not in this episode because it's so long already. But she said, if you raise your child their whole lives where they get everything they want, especially if there's a sick kid, right? Because we know if Dee Dee genuinely thought that Gypsy was not going to live a fulfilled life, that she was going to die young, et cetera, she's going to give her everything so that you can have as fulfilled a life as possible in the short amount of time you have. When that child's never told no, given everything she wants, trips to Disneyland, everyone around her wants to just do everything for her because they feel bad for her. And then there comes a time where that child is told no. And that's when the child decides they're no longer happy with their life and they want to kill you. Is it abuse? Because at some point, Gypsy realized, like, I don't like what's happening here. But what triggered her to not like what was happening there? And if it was her mother preventing her from living a sort of adult, independent, sexually free life that Gypsy wanted to, can you say that she was abused, or can you just say that Gypsy wasn't getting to do what she wanted to do for the first time ever? And so she took out what she believed was the obstacle to that.
Yeah, there was a good conversation that happened between the three of us regarding that and the potential motives. And as you mentioned, we're really diving into the weeds on the medical stuff here, but this interview with Fancy was long. And we like you said, we won't include all of it in this episode because there is more to talk about on that end of it, as far as if Gypsy is involved in the murder more than some people believe, why? What would be her motive behind it? And
why
we talked
then?
about
Why then?
Yeah, why then? And we talked about some financial elements of it as well. And there's some good discussion there.
So we are rounding the bend here to finish up.
This is a short episode. We apologize.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We hardly had talked about anything
It's
today.
Old School Crime Weekly. I mean, listen, if you remember back in the day, 3.5 hour episodes were like the norm.
Dude, on a Crime Weekly recording day, I would just mark off like 6 to 7 hours.
Yeah. It really was.
Because we would have side conversations too. But the point of the matter is we're finishing up here. We're going from 2009 to 2011, right? Not much is happening. Once again, between 2009 and 2011, this is the third time where we're going to have a few years gap in any like extreme or significant medical history.
So from 2009 to 2011, nothing really big happens. It's just, normal doctor visits. She has some dental things. She's got some eye things that are done again, and they tell her that they can no longer fix the eye any further. So this is the last one they're going to do. And in 2011, in the beginning of 2011, 1/31/11, Dee Dee goes to see, she takes Gypsy to see Dr. Lepichon. Dr. Lepichon says, I'd really like to do some additional testing that could maybe give us some real insight into a larger problem, because I just feel like there's something we're missing. And Dee Dee says, well, I'm not really interested in really pursuing it much further than that. She's stable right now, but I'll let you go ahead and run the test. So that's when the test is done. Then they call Dee Dee in to be tested as well, because they find something and they're like, okay, we want to verify this. Dee Dee takes the test. They come back with the test, and the microarray, which is the more complex one that goes, it tests for very rare disorders, comes back and it identifies this rare disorder. And now they have an actual reason for everything that they thought they didn't have reasons for before. So at that point, Munchhausen-by-proxy is ruled out, because if the only reason they identify it as Munchausen-by-proxy, one of the other factors besides the etiology is that there can be no physical or biological reason for these things to be happening to the child. And in 2011, they proved that there is a biological genetic reason. And so it gives credence to the fact that this is not Munchausen-by-proxy again. It would be malingering at this point. And again, in 2011, once this happens, they're notified. Dee Dee again tells them, I'm not really interested in seeking out anything else. I'm happy my daughter's stable. Thank you for finding this. It gives us some hope, very much so. But it's very hard for me to drive down here to Kansas City anymore, because she was getting very, very sick. And so she only goes to Kansas City for just basic things throughout that. They do still see Dr. Lepichon, but they're not interested in going any further in identifying anything else, because they have their answer. And then in 2011, again, the hospital goes, oh, wait a minute, we think she's over the age of 18. And then nothing. Like, they just stop going. They only see very specific doctors after that.
So you would say that the fact that Dr. Lepichon, right? Did I say that right?
Lepichon, yeah.
Yep. He says, come on in, I want to do some additional testing. And Dee Dee's like, you know what? Gypsy's been good for a few years. we're okay. Like, let's just ride this wave. That's a sign that she doesn't have Munchausen by proxy, because if she did, she'd want more testing. She'd want more things to be wrong, or them to find more things. Okay.
And this is where Gypsy starts saying that her mother, her mother was going to seek out a thing to find out why her vocal cords weren't working properly. That's a lie. There's none of that. None of that was happening. She was there. She knew why her vocal cords were a problem, because she knew the symptoms of the freaking chromosome disorder at this point. So she's saying that that's what caused her to want to do it in 2015, is that her mother was going to go make her have another test. And this time she wasn't going to put her under anesthesia because, oh, you're a big girl now. You don't need anesthesia. None of that happened.
Because in the medical records, you can see that the mother is saying, we're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's no test after that, unless for some reason they moved to another facility that I don't have and they kept those from me. There is nothing going on at this point in time. They are still raising money to go to like medical conferences and things, but those medical conferences are the ways that they ended up getting to go to Disneyland and on other trips.
Okay, so basically this is the whole sort of crux of the theory that in 2011, Gypsy Rose gets diagnosed with this chromosome disorder, which explains many, if not all, of her medical issues that she's had since birth. Dee Dee's like, thanks. I'm glad we have an understanding. Gypsy's stable right now. She's doing fine. We don't need to do a bunch of other testing. We're cool. And then they kind of stay away from the doctors and the hospitals, and they just continue sort of, being in the public eye as far as medical conferences and getting free stuff, but they're not all up in the doctors, which Fancy's argument is if Dee Dee had Munchausen by proxy, she would use this chromosome disorder as an entryway into like, okay, well, now we need to run more tests and, we can actually use this. Oh, wow, not only muscular dystrophy, not only cancer, but now she's got some chromosome disorder. And
honestly, this whole episode, especially in this interview, which you guys aren't seeing a ton of it, I'm pushing back. I agree with her here as far as her opinion on this. You know what the best thing would be for someone who's an offender of Munchausen syndrome by proxy?
A legitimate
having your kid actually have a real condition. Yeah, like that's a huge win.
That's a gift that fell into your lap.
Yeah, it's like here we go. Now I got something I can really sink my teeth into. Let's start researching this.
And I don't even have to do the work into making her sick. It's just here.
But if it's true, and I say that if it's true, Dee Dee has this opportunity to latch on to something that may open up a whole new set of doors and says, no, I'm good.
I mean, especially if it's like rare, she can be like, oh, now you can study Gypsy and we can be in the medical journals and we can get attention and accolades that way. And she's going to really think about how she can use that as a springboard to have a different platform.
And it validates everything that's happened in years past. So it is something where if you're riding the line and you're trying to stay objective and impartial throughout this whole thing, Fancy definitely has a passion for this. There's no doubt about it. You can't, and I like Fancy. I think she's a very good interviewer. She knows her stuff, very intelligent, but she's obviously on one side here. There's no, she wouldn't dispute that. She has made up her mind and that's it. So some of the things she says, you have to understand that it could be coming from a place where she's trying to prove a point, her point. This right here, if you're on team Munchausen syndrome by proxy, this doesn't align with that. And that's what she's describing. And I have to agree with her.
I agree. And we are now at the 17-hour mark for this episode. So I'm going to wrap this up. We will wrap this up, but I will ask anybody who's watching or listening, leave us a comment. If you have medical experience, if you're aware of this chromosome disorder, if you have something in your head where you're familiar with Munchausen by proxy and you're like, no, actually, Munchausen by proxy would align with this or it would align with that, let us know your opinions because we want all of it, right? We want to open the lens as wide as possible to let in as everything we can so we can examine it all. And I mean, basically just generally, what do you think about this episode? What do you think about these medical conditions, this medical history? Does this seem consistent with a child who's a victim of Munchausen by proxy, or does it seem consistent with a sick kid who maybe didn't come from the best family with the best morals or values. And this family saw an opportunity, a cash cow, basically. So yeah, she can get a good life. She's sick already, so she can get the stuff she wants and we can get the stuff we want through her.
There is another angle here too,
What
that
is it?
Dee Dee saw her daughter was sick and felt that it wasn't anything for her, because Fancy made this point numerous times in her interview. This wasn't, Dee Dee didn't benefit from this, in her opinion. This isn't what I'm saying. Gypsy was the one who got the Disney trips and got to meet her idols and got to have all this. Was, again, I'm just relaying what Fancy said, and that this was more for Gypsy than it was for Dee Dee. And there may be some people out there that believe Dee Dee was skirting the line in order to get her daughter the best medical attention she could. And we have to ask yourself, what would you do if it was your daughter or your son? How far would you go to make sure they got what they needed?
I suppose you're right, even especially if you came from, a level of poverty, honestly, like Dee Dee did as a single mother. And, a lot of people also wanted us to know in part 1 in the comments, it wasn't like Rod Blanchard just was like, here's money, I'm giving you child support.
That's right.
Dee Dee had to bring him to court to get that child support. And we all know, well, maybe we all don't know, but we should know that that's not always a speedy process. So yeah, she's strapped for money. She knows that families like hers and kids like hers don't always get the top of the line medical care. And maybe she just wanted, a better life for Gypsy. However, I will say there's no perfect victim because there's no perfect human. So what we have to really keep in mind here is I personally don't think that Gypsy Rose or her mother Dee Dee were these like wholesome good people in any way, shape, or form. Did they have good intentions? Did they ever have good? Yeah, I'm sure from time to time. However, when you're grown up, when you're raised in like a toxic environment, you become toxic. And so was this Dee Dee's fault or was it her mom's fault? Was it Dee Dee's mom's fault or was it Dee Dee's mom's fault? You can keep going the fruit of the poisonous tree and all that and kind of, look at the background as we have with people like Casey Anthony with Scott Peterson. But we don't look at Casey Anthony and Scott Peterson and say, oh, well, you're not to blame because of where you came from or what happened to you. We understand that as adults, they had accountability for what they did. And even though Gypsy Rose doesn't always present as an adult, she is, and she was when her mother was murdered. So we need to remember that.
Yeah, and we had I wouldn't say it was a debate, but I'll throw this question out there as well. The three of us, and you guys corrected me pretty much off the rip, but I had asked a question. I was looking up the definition on online, and we could see that, or I could see that Munchausen syndrome by proxy, this is a definition on here, is, quote, a mental illness in the form of child abuse. The caretaker of the child, most often the mother, either makes up false symptoms or causes real symptoms to make it look like the child is sick. And I posed a question to you guys very early on in the interview. Wouldn't Dee Dee stating that her daughter has cancer when she doesn't and then shaving her head be a form of Munchausen syndrome by proxy? And Fancy pushed back on it hard as well, and you tended to agree with her. But I just throw that out there because I think some people may say, yeah, that is Munchausen by proxy. So, and Fancy's like, nope, it's malingering. That's where we're at on this. It's malingering. So there's so much to discuss.
Because it comes down to the motive for why you're doing it. Mm-hmm. If the motive, since in this case, the motive was to get free shit. So it's more like you guys are con artists, Yeah. She wasn't hurting her by shaving her head. And there could have very well been a conversation where it's like, yeah, we're going to shave your head, but like, you're going to get to go to Disneyland. So like, what do you think? And listen, once again, does that mean it's not child abuse? Does that mean it's not like kind of messed up? Because Gypsy's like, 9 years old or 10 years old or whatever.
A form of child abuse here. There's
100%.
We said that episode 1. I mean, anyone who walks away from this saying nothing happened here, Dee Dee was just doing everything the right way. And
simply because Gypsy is a child, and I don't think she can consent or really understand the enormity of the situation. Like if you're a kid and someone's like, if you do this, you're going to get to do this. You're going to be like, hell yeah, let's do that shit, man. Yep. I don't care. You're not understanding what it means. You don't even understand what the impact is on people around you. You're just doing A to get B.
Yeah. I roll around in the chair for a little bit and I get a free trip to Disney World. Sign me up.
Yeah. And like I said, I would argue with anybody who wants to push back and be like, oh, well, this is, child actors are also being kind of abused in a way because they don't really understand the life that they're signing up for. And their parents promise them, fame and fortune and this, and that. And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. Not understanding the implications and what they're giving up.
Yeah. No,
So
it's a lot. It's a lot. And we got a lot more to cover. This is going to be a long series, so buckle up. Like Stephanie said,
buckle up,
weigh in
duckies.
down in the comments. What's
Sorry.
that?
I said buckle up, duckies. I don't know why.
Weigh in the comments down below. Let us know what you think about everything we covered tonight. And as Stephanie said, if you're in the medical profession, if you have some expertise with this, weigh in down below. A lot of people will start liking your comment. It'll move it up to the top. And if it's something that's truly significant, we will pin it because we're going to go back and forth on this one. We're going to definitely go back and forth on this. We're trying to present both sides of the argument. You may not agree with everything you hear. Don't shoot the messenger. We're going to cover it. There's one other thing I wanted to say before we go. Thank you for all the love on part 1 of this. Thank you for the engagement on the Aisha Degree episode as well. Everyone's coming over there, listening, watching, sharing that story as well. We have a lot of people coming around, looking into what we're talking about here. If you haven't already, please like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe and turn on your notifications so
and share.
So you're notified as soon as we drop the next episode, whether that's going to be another part of this series or Crime Weekly News. Any other final words before I take this one out?
No, thank you guys so much for being here. Stay tuned next week. It's going to be a crazy ride.
That's right.
Okay?
Stay safe out there. See you soon. Good night.
Bye.